Mark Hall never imagined his impromptu spelunking trip would lead to him pulling an alien princess from a crumbling temple, but he definitely didn't expect her father, the Emperor, to offer him her hand in marriage as a reward. It had all started with a brochure promising unforgettable subterranean adventures on Xylos, a planet known more for its bizarre geology than its five-star resorts. Mark, a geologist with a penchant for the offbeat, couldn't resist. Now, pinned beneath a slab of what looked like petrified wood, he was starting to regret his adventurous spirit. The earthquake, or whatever Xylos called its tectonic temper tantrums, had shaken the tour group like dice in a cup. The cave system, previously a marvel of crystalline formations and bioluminescent fungi, was now a chaotic jumble of debris. Dust, the color of dried blood, choked the air. Mark coughed, spitting out grit. He remembered the guide's panicked shouts, the scrambling of feet, and then nothing but darkness and the crushing weight on his legs. After what felt like an eternity, he'd managed to wriggle free, only to find himself in a section of the cave that looked less like a natural formation and more like a ruin, an ancient, crumbling ruin to be precise. Ornate carvings depicting creatures he couldn't identify adorned the walls. The air thrummed with a low, almost imperceptible vibration. It was then that he saw her. Buried beneath a pile of rubble in what appeared to be the remains of a ceremonial chamber, lay an alien female. Her skin, a shade of shimmering amethyst, was marred by dust and scratches. Even unconscious, there was an undeniable regal quality to her. Intricate patterns, woven with threads of what looked like pure gold, adorned her clothing. Mark recognized the symbols from the tour guide's introductory lecture, royal markings of the Eleni. He scrambled towards her, adrenaline overriding the pain in his legs. Heaving aside the remaining debris, he checked for a pulse. Faint, but there. He carefully lifted her into his arms, marveling at her lightness. Despite her height, she had to be close to 7 feet tall. As he carried her out of the collapsing chamber, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The next thing he knew, he was standing before Emperor Thuron himself, a towering figure radiating both power and gratitude. The Emperor's throne room was a breathtaking display of Eleni artistry, shimmering metals, intricate mosaics, and holographic projections that danced across the vaulted ceiling. But Mark's attention was fixed on the Emperor's words. "Mark Hall of Earth," Thuron boomed, his voice resonating through the hall. "You have saved my daughter, Princess Estelle. By ancient Eleni tradition, a life debt must be repaid. Therefore, I offer you her hand in marriage." Mark blinked, certain he'd misheard. "I'm honored, Your Majesty," he stammered, "but marriage, I barely know your daughter." A subtle frown creased Estelle's brow, a fleeting expression that hinted at complexities beneath her composed exterior. Her violet eyes, the same color as her skin, met Mark's for a brief, unreadable moment. Thuron continued, his voice softening slightly. "Eleni custom dictates that such a debt be repaid in kind, while other forms of compensation are. Possible marriage to the rescued is deemed most appropriate. Furthermore, our society values genetic diversity. An alliance with humanity could prove beneficial." Mark's gaze drifted to Estelle's clothing. Intricate devices woven into the fabric pulsed with a soft, internal light. Biotechnology, far beyond anything he'd seen on Earth. It hinted at a society that was both advanced and rigidly controlled. A sharp cough interrupted the Emperor. A tall, slender Eleni with skin the color of polished obsidian stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice dripping with disapproval, "is this alliance truly wise? There are other suitors of more suitable lineage." Thuron's eyes narrowed. "Advisor Zalter," he said, his voice filled with steel, "my decision is final." Turning back to Mark, Thuron gestured towards a holographic display showing images of the crumbling temple. "Princess Estelle claims to have no knowledge of why that area was unstable. It has been restricted for centuries. What can you tell us of the collapse, Mr. Hall?" Before Mark could respond, Estelle interjected, her voice smooth and carefully modulated. "I am grateful for your ask, Mr. Hall. However, the decision regarding my future rests solely with my father, at least publicly." As he looked back at the holographic images, Mark noticed something he had missed in the chaos, a faint energy signature emanating from the ruins. It was a low hum, a vibration he could almost feel in his bones, something that his geological knowledge couldn't explain. "Mr. Hall," Emperor Thuron said, his gaze unwavering, "I invite you to stay at the palace to learn more about our culture. Consider this an extended courtship, a chance to see if this arrangement is mutually beneficial." The implicit pressure was as palpable as the low hum from the ruins. Mark knew he was being offered more than just hospitality. He was being offered a deal he couldn't refuse. "I'm honored, Emperor Thuron," Mark stammered, still trying to process the offer. "But marriage, I barely know Princess Estelle." Thuron's expression softened slightly. "There is time for acquaintance, Earthman. For now, accept my gratitude." He gestured, and a tall, slender Eleni with iridescent skin approached. "Zil will escort you to your quarters. They are prepared to your species specifications, though some adaptation may be necessary." Mark followed Zil through seemingly endless corridors of polished obsidian and glowing crystal. The air hummed with an almost imperceptible energy. Finally, they arrived at a large chamber. The walls pulsed with a soft, blue light, and floating platforms served as furniture. "Your quarters, honored guest," Zil announced, bowing slightly before departing. Mark cautiously stepped inside. The room was luxurious but utterly alien. He ran a hand over a smooth, cool surface that resembled polished jade. A panel on the wall shimmered, displaying a series of glyphs he couldn't decipher. He poked at it tentatively. The panel lit up brighter, and a section of the wall slid open, revealing what he assumed was a closet. Inside, strange, shimmering garments hung suspended in mid-air. "Well," he muttered, "when in Rome. Or, well, whatever planet he was on." He reached for what looked like a tunic, but as soon as his fingers brushed against it, the garment sprang to life, unfolding and attempting to envelop him. He yelped, batting at the clinging fabric which felt strangely wet and slick. It was clearly designed for someone, or something, with gills. The door chimed softly, and Estelle entered, her expression a mixture of concern and amusement. "Having trouble, Mark?" He wrestled free of the aquatic garment which collapsed onto the floor in a shimmering heap. "You could say that. I think your closet tried to eat me." Estelle chuckled, her laughter like the chime of distant bells. "That is a purification suit for aquatic endeavors. It is coded to the respiratory requirements of the Eleni who dwell in the ocean cities. The system is sensitive." She approached the panel and touched a series of symbols. "Allow me. Eleni society is structured. Each caste has its designated attire. This panel should now offer options suitable for a surface dweller." She pointed to a selection of simpler, though still quite elegant, tunics and trousers. "These are appropriate for a guest of honor. Though be warned," she added with a mischievous glint in her eye, "the material is self-cleaning. It will adjust its weave to repel any foreign substance. Try not to spill your drink at dinner." Later that evening, Mark found himself seated at a long, ornate table, surrounded by Eleni officials. The air was thick with hushed conversation and the scent of exotic spices. The food, while visually stunning, was challenging. He tentatively poked at a gelatinous, iridescent cube with his fork. He cleared his throat and attempted a greeting he'd overheard earlier. "Greetings, Elder Thal. May your crest shine brightly." The elder, a formidable Eleni with a towering crest of shimmering blue, recoiled slightly. "That is an archaic salutation, Earthman, used only in the most rural of provinces. Its connotation is less than respectful." Estelle, seated beside him, subtly placed her hand on his arm. "Elder Thal is a scholar of ancient traditions, Mark. He appreciates historical accuracy. However," she added, turning to the elder with a graceful smile, Mark is a guest in our court and unfamiliar with our nuanced protocols. I am certain no offense was intended. The elder's expression softened, though a flicker of disapproval remained in his eyes. Indeed, Princess, though perhaps a more thorough briefing on our customs would be beneficial for our guest. After the awkward exchange, Estelle leaned closer to Mark. I apologize for that. Alini society places great emphasis on precision and adherence to tradition. It stems from our history. Our ancestors faced extreme environmental challenges on our home world. Survival depended on strict adherence to proven methods. Now it's just habit. Later, while exploring the palace gardens, a surreal landscape of bioluminescent flora and gravity-defying waterfalls, Mark overheard a heated discussion. Emperor Thuron stood surrounded by several advisors, their voices low and urgent. Unprecedented risk. One advisor hissed. Dilution of the bloodline. Another countered. Political instability. A third added. Mark couldn't make out the entire conversation, but he clearly heard one phrase. The human. He quickly retreated, his heart pounding. He was definitely not welcome here by everyone. He found Estelle near a shimmering pond, gazing at the reflection of the twin moons in the water. I overheard. A conversation, he said, his voice tight. Your father, his advisors. They don't approve of me. Estelle sighed, her crest dimming slightly. There is considerable opposition, Mark. Some fear the unknown. Others believe that a union with an outsider would weaken our empire. My father. He sees things differently, but he cannot ignore the concerns of his council. Suddenly, a klaxon blared, echoing through the palace. Red lights flashed, and Alini officials rushed past, their faces etched with concern. What's happening? Mark asked. The primary energy regulator, Estelle said, her voice grim. It's malfunctioning. If it fails completely, it could destabilize the entire palace energy grid. She hurried off, and Mark followed, arriving at a large chamber filled with frantic activity. Alini engineers swarmed around a massive, humming device, their faces illuminated by flickering diagnostic displays. We've tried everything, one engineer shouted, his voice strained. The energy signature is fluctuating wildly. We can't get a stable reading. Estelle approached the lead engineer. Report. The regulator is overloaded, Princess. We can't isolate the source of the surge. Conventional methods are failing. Estelle turned to Mark, her expression thoughtful. You mentioned your geological expertise. You understand energy flows within the Earth. Do you see anything different? Mark approached the regulator cautiously. It was a complex device of shimmering crystals and pulsating conduits. He focused, trying to apply his knowledge of geothermal energy to this alien technology. He noticed that the energy flow wasn't smooth. It was erratic, almost chaotic. It's like a kink in a hose, he said slowly. The energy is building up at one point, then releasing in bursts. You need to find a way to smooth out the flow, to redirect the excess energy. He pointed to a series of conduits that converged at a central node. What if you could create a bypass, a controlled release valve? You could channel the excess energy into a secondary circuit, stabilize the primary flow. The engineers exchanged skeptical glances, but Estelle nodded. It's worth a try. Can you help us implement your bypass? For the next several hours, Mark worked alongside the Alini engineers, translating his human understanding into their advanced technology. He suggested modifications to the conduits, guided the placement of energy dampeners, and helped recalibrate the flow regulators. It was a tense, collaborative effort, a blend of human ingenuity and Alini precision. Finally, with a collective sigh of relief, the energy signature stabilized. The red lights dimmed and the klaxon fell silent. The regulator hummed smoothly, its energy flow now steady and controlled. The lead engineer approached Mark, a newfound respect in his eyes. Your unorthodox approach. It worked. We were out of conventional options. Estelle smiled, her eyes sparkling. Thank you, Mark. Your human perspective was invaluable. She paused, her expression thoughtful. We Aleni can sometimes be limited by our own thinking, by our adherence to tradition. Later, as they walked through the now quiet corridors, Mark turned to Estelle. About that temple, the one that collapsed, I felt a strange energy there. What exactly was it built on top of? The temple was built on a known but supposedly dormant energy source, Estelle explained. We call it the heart of Ilion. It is said to be the source of our planet's life force. Dormant, Mark asked, but I felt it. It was powerful. Our records indicate that the energy source has been inactive for millennia, Estelle replied. But now that you mention it, Mark frowned. Can you access those records? I'd like to see what they say about the temple's purpose and the energy source's properties. Estelle led him to a vast archive, filled with shimmering data crystals and holographic displays. They spent hours poring over ancient texts, searching for information about the temple and the heart of Ilion. As they reviewed the reports, Mark pointed to an anomaly. These reports are inconsistent. Some describe the temple as a place of worship, others as an energy containment facility, and the descriptions of the energy source. They vary wildly. Some say it's a benign life force, others claim it's volatile and dangerous. He paused, his brow furrowed in thought. And another thing. The regulator malfunctioned at the exact same time as the temple collapsed, didn't it? It's too much of a coincidence, don't you think? Mark pressed, his gaze fixed on Estelle. Estelle pursed her lips, the bioluminescent patterns on her skin shifting subtly with her unease. Coincidences do happen, Mark. The regulator is an old system. Mechanical failure is not unheard of. Despite her words, she gestured to a nearby console. Still, we should review the palace security logs, just to be certain. The logs unfolded across the holographic display, lines of complex Aleni script cascading down the screen. Mark, despite his unfamiliarity with the language, recognized the graphical representations of energy flow. There, he pointed. A brief power surge right before the temple collapsed, and coinciding precisely with the regulator malfunction. An overload. Estelle traced the energy spike with a slender finger, but that would require deliberate action. Exactly, Mark said. Someone overloaded the system, triggering both events, maybe to cover their tracks or maybe they had another reason. Estelle remained skeptical. Such an act would require access to the highest levels of the palace infrastructure, it seems. Unlikely. Before Mark could respond, a chime echoed through the room. You are summoned to the Emperor's presence, a synthesized voice announced. Emperor Thuron's throne room was a spectacle of polished obsidian and shimmering energy conduits. Thuron himself, a figure of imposing stature and regal bearing, sat upon the elevated dais. Mark Hall, he said, his voice resonating with authority. I wish to express my gratitude for your assistance with the regulator. Your human ingenuity proved invaluable. Mark bowed his head. I was glad to be of service, Your Majesty. Thuron's expression hardened slightly. However, I must caution you against interfering in matters of Aleni security. The collapse of the temple is a sensitive issue. It is best left to the authorities. With respect, Your Majesty, Mark replied, I believe the two incidents are connected. That is for us to determine, Thuron said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He paused, his gaze piercing. The temple was a historical archive. It contained forbidden knowledge about the energy source that powers our city. Mark's eyebrows rose. Forbidden knowledge. Knowledge best left undisturbed, Thuron emphasized. I trust you understand. Estelle, sensing the veiled threat in her father's words, felt a pang of guilt. Later that evening, she sought out Mark in his quarters. I apologize for my father's bluntness, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He made his point, Mark said, a wry smile on his face. But I'm guessing you don't entirely agree with him. Estelle hesitated, then reached into her tunic, producing a small data crystal. This contains restricted access codes to the palace archives. My father would not approve, but I believe you deserve to know the truth. Mark took the crystal, his fingers brushing against hers. "Estelle, I don't want to put you at risk." "The risk is already here," she said, her eyes meeting his. "We just need to understand it." The palace archives were a labyrinth of ancient data repositories. Mark, guided by Estelle's access codes, navigated through the digital maze until he found the section pertaining to the energy source. He located a hidden file, its designation obscured by layers of encryption. "What is it?" Estelle asked, peering over his shoulder. "It's a project to weaponize the energy source," Mark said, his voice grim. "Centuries ago. Apparently it was abandoned due to its instability. The file contained schematics, research notes, and chilling accounts of failed experiments." Mark scrolled through the data, his mind racing. "There's a name here. Valerius. He was the lead scientist on the project. He was obsessed with controlling the energy source." Estelle gasped. "Valerius? That's an ancestor of Counselor Xylas, a prominent noble, very politically ambitious." "Xylas," Mark repeated, the name echoing in his mind. "He's connected somehow. We need to investigate him." They decided to proceed discreetly, attending a formal reception hosted by Xylas himself. The hall was filled with Eleni nobles, their shimmering garments and elaborate hairstyles creating a dazzling spectacle. Mark, feeling out of place in his simple attire, kept a close eye on Xylas. He observed Xylas engaging in a hushed conversation with a group of individuals he recognized from the palace logs as known dissidents and technology merchants. Mark subtly activated a portable scanner he'd managed to acquire, aiming it at Xylas's datapad. "What are you doing?" Estelle whispered, her voice tinged with concern. "Analyzing his datapad signal," Mark replied, his eyes fixed on the scanner's display. "He's communicating with someone. Encrypted communication, unknown location." Xylas, seemingly sensing Mark's scrutiny, broke off his conversation and approached them, a pre-Mr. Ori smile on his face. "Mr. Hall," he said, his voice dripping with false cordiality. "Enjoying our little gathering, I trust you find Eleni society stimulating." "Very stimulating," Mark replied, meeting Xylas's gaze. "I do hope you are not overstaying your welcome," Xylas said, his smile fading. "Some things are best left to those who truly understand them." Later that night, back in his quarters, Mark was jolted awake by a sudden chill. The environmental controls were malfunctioning, the temperature plummeting rapidly. He tried to adjust the settings, but the system was unresponsive. Panic flared as he realized the air was becoming thin, the pressure dropping. Someone had sabotaged his quarters. Using his knowledge of emergency survival techniques, gleaned from years of geological expeditions, Mark managed to jury-rig a temporary life support system, diverting power from the lighting grid to a makeshift oxygen generator. Gasping for breath, he sent a distress signal to Estelle. Estelle arrived within minutes, accompanied by a squad of palace guards. They found Mark huddled beneath a thermal blanket, his face pale and drawn. The air in the room was frigid, the walls coated with frost. "Mark, what happened?" Estelle cried, rushing to his side. "Sabotage," Mark rasped, his voice weak. "The environmental controls. Someone disabled them." Estelle examined the control panel, her expression hardening. This was not a simple malfunction. This was deliberate and highly skilled. The technician used specialized tools. "They wanted it to look like an accident," Mark said, his mind racing, further confirming the conspiracy. Estelle's face was a mask of fury. "Xylas," she spat. "This has his mark all over it. My family controls a vast network of energy conduits throughout the city. That would have granted him access to the regulator system." Estelle, after examining Mark's scanner data, her eyes widened. "The encrypted communication. I recognize the location. It's the location of the original temple." Mark closed his eyes, remembering the feeling from the temple. "I remember feeling the location to be hollow below the surface." They set off towards the temple site, the hovercar skimming low over the ochre plains. The once smooth road was now fractured and choked with dust, a testament to the energy surge that had weakened the temple's foundations. Twisted metal skeletons of abandoned vehicles lined the route, silent witnesses to a forgotten catastrophe. The temple loomed in the distance, a jagged silhouette against the bruised purple sky. Closer now, it was a chaotic jumble of fallen stonework and twisted metal. Mark circled the perimeter, his geologist's eyes scanning the rubble for any sign of structural weakness or an unnatural disturbance. "There," he said, pointing to a section of collapsed wall half buried in the sand. "The energy signature is strongest there, and look at the displacement the blast came from within." They began to clear the debris, the grating sound of stone against metal echoing in the still air. After several minutes of strenuous work, they uncovered a narrow opening, almost completely concealed beneath a slab of intricately carved lintel. "A hidden entrance," Estelle breathed, her voice hushed with anticipation. Valerius was thorough. The air grew noticeably colder as they squeezed through the opening, the scent of dust and decay heavy in the air. The passage sloped downwards, leading into a vast, echoing chamber. Flickering emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows across rows of abandoned research equipment. Consoles blinked erratically, their screens displaying fragmented data streams. "An abandoned research lab," Mark observed, his hand brushing against a corroded metal surface. "This is where they were experimenting with the energy source." Spread across a large table were schematics for a complex device, its purpose immediately clear to Mark. "An amplifier," he muttered, tracing the lines with his finger. "It's designed to channel and focus the energy, but the design is flawed, wildly so." He pointed to a series of unstable junctions. If they activated this improperly, it would create a catastrophic feedback loop. Estelle moved towards a dusty console, her fingers dancing across the keys. A holographic display flickered to life, revealing a series of journal entries. "Valerius's research notes," she said, her voice permeated with growing horror. She began to read aloud, translating the archaic Alini script. "The energy source holds the key to unlocking our true potential, to transcending the limitations of free will, to creating a unified consciousness under a single benevolent leader." Mark frowned. Benevolent leader, that sounds less like scientific research and more like mind control. Estelle continued reading, her expression growing darker. "The initial trials have shown promising results. Subjects exposed to the amplified energy exhibit increased obedience and a diminished capacity for independent thought. Side effects include cognitive impairment and cellular degradation." She looked up, her eyes wide with alarm. He intended to use this to control the entire Alini population. Mark connected the dots. "Xylas isn't just planning to weaponize the energy, he wants to enslave your people, to make himself an absolute ruler." Suddenly, a piercing alarm shattered the silence. Red lights flashed, bathing the chamber in an ominous glow. "Security system activated," a synthesized voice announced. "Intruders detected. Lockdown initiated." Heavy metal doors slammed shut, sealing off the entrance. The ground vibrated as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the passage. "We've been detected," Estelle said, her hand instinctively reaching for her ceremonial dagger. A figure emerged from the shadows, his face illuminated by the flashing red lights. It was Xylas, flanked by a squad of heavily armed guards. His expression was a mask of cold fury. "So the princess decided to play detective," he sneered. "I must admit I'm disappointed. I expected more." "Loyalty. Loyalty to tyranny," Estelle retorted, her voice ringing with defiance. "You would sacrifice the free will of our people for your own ambition." Xylas chuckled. "Free will is an illusion, Estelle. Order and stability are the true virtues. And I am the only one who can provide them." He turned his gaze to Mark, his eyes filled with contempt. "As for you, human, you are a mere pawn in this game, a temporary distraction. I commend you on saving her life, but now you will pay the price." "I'm touched by your concern," Mark replied, his voice deceptively calm. "But I'm not one to stand idly by while megalomaniacs plot to enslave entire civilizations." Xylas's smile vanished. "You overestimate your importance, human. You will die here, and Estelle will finally accept her destiny as my bride." Estelle stepped forward, placing herself between Xylas and Mark. "I will never be your bride, Xylas. I would rather die than submit to your twisted vision." She began to argue with Xylas, trying to sway his followers and stall for time. While Estelle was talking, Mark's eyes darted around the chamber, searching for an escape route. He spotted a narrow ventilation shaft high on the wall, almost hidden behind a tangle of wires. "Estelle," he murmured, "there's a way out, up there." He gestured towards the shaft. Estelle glanced at the shaft, then back at Xylas. "You think you can escape?" Xylas laughed. "There is nowhere to run. This chamber is sealed, and soon it will be your tomb." Mark examined the shaft more closely. It was barely wide enough to squeeze through, and Estelle in her elaborate court attire would never fit. He scanned the lab for anything he could use. His eyes landed on a discarded plasma cutter, its power cell still partially charged. "I might be able to widen it," he said, grabbing the cutter. "But I need a few minutes." As Mark worked, sparks flying as he cut into the metal, Estelle continued to engage Xylas in a heated debate. "Your methods are barbaric, Xylas. You would turn our people into mindless drones." "I would give them purpose," Xylas retorted. "A purpose greater than themselves, a purpose guided by my wisdom." "Wisdom? You call tyranny wisdom?" Estelle challenged. "Our people value freedom. They value choice. You would take that away from them." Some of Xylas's guards shifted uneasily, their faces etched with doubt. Estelle's words were clearly having an effect. Mark worked furiously, the plasma cutter whining as it sliced through the metal. The air grew thick with the smell of burning alloy. Finally, with a shower of sparks, he cut a section of the shaft wide enough to squeeze through. "I've got it," he shouted. "It's not pretty, but it'll work." Before they could reach the shaft, Xylas raised his hand. "Enough," he barked. "Activate the lockdown sequence, seal the chamber and initiate self-destruct." A klaxon blared, even louder than before. The floor vibrated violently. From somewhere deep within the temple, they heard the ominous sound of a countdown timer. "Self-destruct sequence initiated," the synthesized voice announced. "T-5 minutes." Xylas smiled grimly. "Enjoy your last moments, princess. Your defiance ends here. I will return when you are gone." Xylas and his guards retreated, the heavy metal doors slamming shut behind them. Mark and Estelle were trapped. "We have to get out of here," Mark said, grabbing Estelle's hand. "Now." They scrambled towards the ventilation shaft, the ground shaking beneath their feet. Mark squeezed through the opening, then reached back to help Estelle. But her elaborate dress was too wide. She struggled, pulling and tugging, but the fabric wouldn't budge. "It's no use," she said, her face pale with frustration. "I'm stuck." Mark looked at the countdown timer displayed on a nearby console. 4 minutes remaining. "Then we'll have to leave it behind," he said, his voice firm. Estelle hesitated for a moment, then nodded. With a swift motion, she tore the elaborate skirt of her dress, ripping away yards of shimmering fabric. Beneath the torn gown, she wore practical leggings and boots. Mark's eyes widened slightly, and Estelle felt a surge of warmth. "Much better," she said, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. They squeezed through the ventilation shaft, crawling through the narrow passage. The air grew hotter, the smell of burning metal more intense. They could hear the sounds of the lab collapsing around them, the walls groaning and cracking under the strain. They emerged into a narrow service tunnel, barely wide enough to stand. The tunnel sloped upwards, leading towards the surface. "This way," Mark shouted, leading the way. They ran through the tunnel, the heat searing their lungs. Debris rained down from the ceiling, forcing them to duck and weave. They could hear the sounds of Xylas's guards searching for them, their voices echoing through the tunnels. Finally, they reached the end of the tunnel. A metal grate blocked their path. Mark grabbed it and pulled with all his strength. The grate gave way with a screech of metal, revealing a blinding flash of light. They stumbled out of the tunnel and onto the surface, just as the temple exploded in a massive fireball. The ground shook, sending a shockwave that knocked them off their feet. A surge of energy pulsed outwards, overloading the city's power grid. The capital plunged into darkness, the once brilliant skyline replaced by an ominous black void. Alarms wailed and the sounds of panic filled the air. As they lay on the ground, coughing and gasping for breath, they saw a lone figure running away from the temple, towards the city. It was one of Xylas's guards, his face contorted with fear. He disappeared into the darkness. Somewhere in the Emperor's palace, a flickering lamp illuminated the face of a weary aide as the guard burst through the doors. "Your Majesty," he gasped. "The temple, it's gone, Xylas." He initiated the self-destruct, the princess, and the human. The Emperor's roar echoed through the command center, cutting off the guard's frantic report. Holographic displays flickered, showing the aftermath of the temple's destruction, a smoldering crater where ancient stones had stood moments before. "Lockdown, seal the city. No one in, no one out. Find Xylas. He is to be apprehended, dead or alive." Sirens wailed, bathing the city in pulsating red light. The energy surge had plunged the metropolis into darkness, save for the emergency beacons that stabbed through the gloom. Mark, pulling Estelle to her feet amidst the panicked crowds, felt the ground tremble beneath them. The shockwave from the temple's destruction had ripped through the city's power grid, leaving them stranded in the ensuing chaos. "This is my fault," Estelle whispered, her voice tight with anguish. "I should have seen this coming. I should have stopped him." Mark gripped her hand, his touch firm and reassuring. "This isn't your fault, Estelle. Xylas made his choices. Now we need to focus on helping your people." They pushed their way through the throng of fleeing Alini, their bioluminescent markings flashing erratically in the darkness, reflecting their fear. Mark noticed a comms panel on a nearby building, its emergency light blinking insistently. "Maybe we can get some information," he shouted over the din. Estelle nodded, and they fought their way to the panel. Mark accessed the city's emergency communication network, and a cacophony of static and desperate voices filled the air. Injured Alini cried out for help, families searched for lost loved ones, and reports of looting and violence crackled through the system. "This is overwhelming," Estelle murmured, her eyes wide with horror. Mark, drawing on his experience with human emergency protocols, took charge. "Okay, listen up," he said into the comms. "This is Mark Hall. I have medical training. If you are injured, state your location and the nature of your injuries. We will coordinate rescue efforts." He rattled off instructions for basic first aid, using clear and concise language. His calm, steady voice cut through the panic. Slowly, order began to emerge from the chaos. Alini citizens, inspired by Estelle's presence, even in the darkness, began to help their neighbors, tending to the wounded and guiding the lost. As they moved through a darkened street, they heard the sound of breaking glass and raucous laughter. A group of Alini were smashing the windows of a store, grabbing what they could. "Stop!" Estelle cried out, her voice ringing with authority. The looters turned, their eyes glinting in the dim light. "Get out of here, princess," one of them sneered. "This is our chance. The city's gone to hell anyway." Mark stepped forward, placing himself between Estelle and the looters. "This isn't the way," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Looting will only make things worse. Your neighbors need your help, not your greed." He spoke of community, of working together to rebuild, of the importance of helping those in need. His words, coupled with Estelle's presence, seemed to have an effect. Some of the looters lowered their heads in shame. Estelle gasped, recognizing one of the looters. "Jorek, is that you? You used to serve in the palace kitchens." The Alini, a young male with dirt-stained markings, avoided her gaze. "Things are different now, princess," he mumbled. "The palace doesn't feed us anymore." The exchange revealed a painful truth. The chaos had exposed the underlying social tensions and economic disparities within Eleni society. Mark realized this wasn't just about a power outage. It was about a system that had failed to provide for its people. "We need to get to the central power station," Estelle said, her voice resolute. "If we can restore power, we can restore order." They navigated the darkened streets, their path illuminated by the flickering emergency lights. Suddenly, a squad of the Emperor's Guard materialized, their weapons drawn. "Halt!" the lead guard barked. "By order of the Emperor, the city is under lockdown. Return to the palace immediately." Estelle stepped forward, her bioluminescent markings flaring. "I am Princess Estelle." "You will stand aside." The guard hesitated, but his expression remained impassive. "We have strict orders, princess. No one is to be allowed to move freely. You must return to the palace for your own safety." Mark noticed something off about the guards' behavior. Their movements were stiff, their communication clipped and unnatural. He suspected they were under Xylas's influence, perhaps even controlled by some kind of mind-altering technology. "I don't think they're here to help us," Mark whispered to Estelle. "We need to go around." They slipped into a narrow alleyway, using Mark's knowledge of urban navigation to evade the guards. The city's darkened streets became their ally, providing cover and concealment. Finally, they reached the central power station, a massive structure of gleaming metal and pulsing energy conduits. But now, it was a scene of devastation. Wires hung sparking, control panels were shattered, and the air crackled with residual energy. "This wasn't just an energy surge," Mark said, examining the damage. "This was deliberate sabotage." He noticed a hidden access panel concealed behind a scorched section of wall. He pried it open, revealing a network of conduits and control wires. "Xylas knew this place inside and out," he muttered. As they delved deeper into the power station, they found a recording device tucked away in a maintenance room. Mark activated it, and the voice of a power station engineer filled the air. "Senator Xylas visited the station earlier today. He asked some unusual questions about the energy regulators and the failsafe mechanisms. He seemed particularly interested in the override codes." Suddenly, the monitor on the wall flickered to life, displaying Xylas's smug face. "Welcome, princess," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "I anticipated your arrival. I trust you're enjoying my little surprise." The power station doors slammed shut with a deafening clang. Red lights flashed, and a computerized voice announced, "Reactor meltdown sequence initiated. Evacuation protocols disabled." Xylas's image dissolved, leaving Mark and Estelle trapped in the heart of the damaged power station, with a failsafe counting down to a full reactor meltdown. The klaxons blared, a relentless assault on their ears, punctuated by the grinding shriek of metal contorting under immense pressure. Heat radiated from the reactor core, baking the air and making each breath a struggle. Estelle coughed, her usually vibrant blue skin flushed crimson. "We have to move, Mark. The meltdown sequence is initiated." Mark scanned the chaotic scene, his geologist's mind overriding his panic. He ignored the flashing lights and the dire warnings, focusing instead on the structure of the power station itself. "Wait," he said, pointing to a barely visible fissure in the wall, partially obscured by a tangle of sparking wires. "That looks like a geological fault line. There might be a service tunnel running along it, a secondary escape route." Estelle followed his gaze, her eyes widening. "The original construction plans. I remember something about that. It was deemed too unstable, sealed off." "Sealed doesn't mean inaccessible," Mark retorted, already heading towards the fissure. He ripped away the wires, revealing a narrow opening. "It's a tight fit, but it's our best shot." They squeezed through the opening, finding themselves in a dimly lit tunnel. Water trickled down the walls, and the air was thick with the smell of damp earth and ozone. As they moved deeper, a low hum grew louder, resolving into the whirring of rotors. "Security drones," Estelle warned, drawing a sleek, silver device from her belt. "Automated patrol units. I can disrupt their energy signatures, but only for a short time." 3 drones rounded a corner, their optical sensors glowing red. They resembled metallic insects, their articulated limbs clicking against the tunnel floor. Estelle activated her device, and a wave of energy pulsed outwards. The drones stuttered, their movements becoming erratic before freezing in place. "Hurry," Estelle urged, her voice strained. "The disruption won't last." They sprinted through the tunnel, the deactivated drones looming like metallic statues. The tunnel opened into a small chamber, where a reinforced blast door blocked their path. Red lights flashed above the door, and a complex control panel was embedded in the wall. "This is it," Mark said, his voice grim. "This door is designed to withstand a reactor explosion. We need to override it." Estelle examined the control panel, her fingers flying over the illuminated symbols. "The security protocols are incredibly complex. I don't know if I can crack them in time." Mark pushed past her, his eyes scanning the panel. He ignored the alien symbols, focusing instead on the underlying structure of the code. He noticed a repeating pattern, a sequence of binary digits that resonated with his understanding of human engineering principles. "Try this," he said, pointing to a specific sequence of symbols. "Enter this code, then reverse it and repeat the first sequence." Estelle hesitated, then followed his instructions. The control panel beeped, and the red lights flickered. A grinding sound echoed through the chamber as the blast door slowly began to retract. "It's working," Estelle exclaimed, relief flooding her face. They scrambled through the opening as the door slid fully open. Behind them, the power station groaned, a monstrous sound of buckling metal and escaping energy. They burst out of the tunnel just as the reactor reached critical mass. The world erupted in a blinding flash of light and a deafening roar. The force of the explosion slammed into them, throwing them through the air like ragdolls. Mark gasped, his lungs burning, his ears ringing. He blinked, trying to clear his vision. He was lying amidst rubble, the air thick with dust and smoke. Estelle was beside him, coughing and disoriented. They were in the city, but it was unrecognizable. Buildings had collapsed, streets were choked with debris, and panicked crowds surged in every direction. The sky was a swirling vortex of smoke and ash. "We made it," Estelle said, her voice hoarse. "But the city..." They stumbled to their feet, surveying the devastation. The power station was gone, replaced by a crater of twisted metal and smoldering earth. The shockwave had ripped through the city, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Estelle's wrist communicator beeped urgently. She activated it, her expression hardening as she listened to the message. "It's from Captain Ryla," she said, her voice low. "A loyalist within the palace guard. She has a safe location for us and information about Xylas's plan." "What plan?" Mark asked, his senses on high alert. "He intends to weaponize the energy source," Estelle replied, her eyes filled with dread. "Use it to seize control of the Empire." Mark's mind raced. Weaponizing an energy source of that magnitude. The implications were terrifying. He thought back to the readings he had taken at the temple, the unique energy signature he had detected. "That energy source," he said, his voice gaining urgency. "It's similar to a rare mineral found on Earth, a type of tellurium compound with unique energy-conducting properties. If Xylas can control it, then he would be unstoppable," Estelle finished, her face pale. "Ryla's message includes coordinates for the safe location. We need to get there now." They navigated the chaotic streets, dodging falling debris and panicked citizens. They reached a partially collapsed building, its facade crumbling but its interior relatively intact. Inside, they found Captain Ryla, a tall, imposing Aleni woman with a stern gaze and a blaster strapped to her side. "Your Majesty," Ryla said, bowing her head respectfully, "I'm glad you're safe. Xylas has deployed a network of energy dampeners throughout the city. They're suppressing any resistance. Energy dampeners, Mark asked. What do? They disrupt Eleni energy abilities, Ryla explained, making it difficult for us to use our powers. Mark frowned. But they wouldn't affect humans, would they? Ryla shook her head. No, they're specifically designed to counteract Eleni energy signatures. A plan began to form in Mark's mind. Then we have an advantage. Estelle, you need to gather support from any loyalist factions you can find. I'll disable the energy dampeners. It's too dangerous to split up, Estelle protested. It's the only way, Mark insisted. You need to rally the troops. I can move more quickly and discreetly on my own. Besides, he added with a wry smile, I'm the only one who can actually do anything about those dampeners. Estelle hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Be careful, Mark. I don't want to lose you. Mark squeezed her hand. I'll be fine. Just promise me you'll be safe. He turned to Ryla. Can you provide me with a schematic of the dampener network? Ryla nodded, handing him a data pad. And these, she said, offering him a blaster and a small hacking device. You'll need them. Mark took the items, his expression determined. He studied the schematic, his mind already racing, calculating the best way to bypass the dampener's security protocols. He recognized the underlying logic, a crude attempt to replicate human encryption methods. He moved quickly, using his knowledge of electronics and human hacking techniques to infiltrate the dampener's control systems. As he disabled the first dampener, a strange sensation washed over him, a tingling in his fingertips, a subtle hum in his ears. It was as if he could feel the energy flowing back into the city, the suppressed Eleni abilities awakening. He shook it off, attributing it to stress and exhaustion, and moved on to the next dampener. Meanwhile, Estelle, with Ryla at her side, managed to rally a small group of loyalist soldiers. They were armed and determined, but outnumbered and outgunned. As they moved through the city, they were ambushed by Xylas's forces. A fierce firefight erupted, the air filled with blaster fire and the screams of the wounded. Estelle fought bravely, but they were overwhelmed. One by one, her loyalists fell until only she and Ryla remained. They were surrounded, their blasters empty, their faces grim. Xylas's forces closed in, their weapons trained on Estelle. A hologram flickered to life, revealing Xylas's sneering face. Well, 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 he said, his voice dripping with malice. Look what we have here, the princess and her little bodyguard. I believe your friend, the human, is disabling my dampeners. A pity. Send him a message. Tell him that if he doesn't surrender immediately, I will execute you both. Answer. The harsh static of the comms cut out, leaving Mark staring at the blank screen, the Emperor's urgent plea echoing in his mind. 24 hours. Xylas's voice, cold and devoid of emotion, still rang in his ears. Surrender the city or the princess dies. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture doing little to alleviate the knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. Surrender wasn't an option. It would condemn countless Eleni to Xylas's tyrannical rule, but sacrificing Estelle. The thought was unbearable. He gripped the edge of the table, fist clenched. He had to find another way. Damn it, he muttered, the word a strangled whisper. He glanced towards the energy readings on one of the consoles, seeking some sort of distraction. But something was different. The readings. They were pulsing, almost vibrating with an energy that seemed to resonate within him. A faint tremor ran through his body, a sensation he'd only experienced faintly before, now amplified tenfold. He closed his eyes, focusing on the feeling. Images flickered behind his eyelids, jagged rock formations, glowing veins of energy snaking through the earth, a dark, cavernous space humming with power, a structure. No, an artifact of immense alien design, radiating an almost unbearable heat. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving him breathless and disoriented. He stumbled back, catching himself on the console. What the hell was that? He gasped. The energy readings, though still elevated, seemed to have stabilized. It was as if the vision itself had somehow changed them. "Ryla," he said, his voice regaining some composure as he attempted to contact the leader of the Alini resistance, but the signal was still being jammed. He needed to warn her, to figure out what Xylas was planning. He knew the madman wanted power, but this vision, it suggested something more, something far more dangerous. He paced the room, piecing together the fragments of his vision, the artifact. It had to be the source of the energy surge that had destabilized the temple. Xylas wasn't just after power, he wanted to control that energy, to weaponize it. And if what he had seen was any indication, the potential devastation was unimaginable. "We can't wait for Ryla," Mark stated. "We have to go after Xylas ourselves." He pulled up a map of the city, his geologist's eyes scanning the intricate network of tunnels and caverns beneath the surface. The city's built on a network of old lava tubes. If we can navigate them, we can get close to Xylas's stronghold undetected. Meanwhile, deep within Xylas's heavily guarded fortress, Estelle was putting her own plan into motion. Dressed in the guise of one of Xylas's guards, she moved through the corridors, her violet eyes sharp and calculating. She approached a group of lieutenants, their faces grim and determined. "Counselor Xylas seems preoccupied," she said, her voice carefully modulated to mimic the cadence of Xylas's inner circle. "I overheard him speaking of drastic measures that could destabilize the entire region." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Are you certain that his ambition is worth the potential cost?" She watched as doubt flickered in their eyes, sowing the seeds of dissent. She continued her rounds, subtly questioning Xylas's orders, highlighting the risks and planting seeds of suspicion. Her diplomatic skills, honed over years of navigating the treacherous waters of the Alini court, were proving invaluable. But her time was running out. In a hidden chamber, Estelle discovered a holographic display outlining Xylas's ultimate plan. The artifact, once activated, would unleash a wave of energy so powerful it could shatter entire planets. Xylas intended to use it to cow the galaxy into submission, ruling through fear and destruction. Back on Mark's ship, he gathered his gear, preparing for the infiltration. As he did, a gruff voice interrupted him. "Going somewhere, human." Mark turned to see a group of Alini warriors standing in the doorway, their faces etched with suspicion and hostility. They were rebels, but not Ryla's group. "We know about Xylas," their leader growled, his hand resting on the hilt of his energy blade. "We've been fighting him for years, but we don't trust outsiders, especially not humans." "I understand your distrust," Mark replied, his voice calm and measured. "But Xylas is a threat to everyone, Alini and human alike. I have a plan to stop him, but I need your help." He outlined his plan to infiltrate the stronghold through the tunnels, emphasizing the need for their knowledge of the city's underbelly. The rebel leader listened intently, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke. "Why should we trust you? What do humans know about fighting a war like this?" "Maybe nothing," Mark said, "but I know tactics, I know strategy, and I know how to use what I have to get the job done." He explained his understanding of Xylas's defenses, his emphasis on their weak points. "I can help you win," Mark finished. After a long silence, the rebel leader nodded. "All right, human, we'll help you, but if you betray us, you'll regret it." The rebels revealed that Xylas had fortified the stronghold with energy barriers, making a direct assault impossible. "They're powered by the same energy source as the artifact," one of the rebels explained. "Impenetrable." Mark frowned, considering the problem. Then a thought struck him. "What frequency are they operating on?" he asked. The rebels exchanged confused glances. "Frequency? What does that matter?" "It matters," Mark said, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "Back on Earth, we use sonic frequencies to break through rock and concrete. If we can match the frequency of the energy barriers, we might be able to disrupt them." While Mark was developing this plan, Estelle decided to take a calculated risk. Knowing that Xylas would eventually discover her deception, she staged a daring escape attempt. setting off alarms and causing chaos throughout the stronghold. The diversion would draw Xylas's forces away from the main entrance, creating an opening for Mark and the rebels. Using a modified sonic device cobbled together from salvaged equipment and human ingenuity, Mark and the rebels approached the entrance to the stronghold. The device hummed with almost unchecked power. "Ready?" Mark asked, his voice barely audible above the din. The rebel leader nodded grimly. "Let's do it." Mark activated the device. A high-pitched whine filled the air, intensifying until it became almost unbearable. The energy barriers flickered and sputtered, their shimmering surface distorting. Then, with a final, ear-splitting screech, they collapsed. The rebels charged through the breach, weapons blazing. Mark followed close behind, his heart pounding in his chest. They were inside. As they advanced deeper into the stronghold, they discovered Xylas had already begun the process of activating the artifact. The chamber was filled with pulsating energy, the air crackling with raw power. In the center of the room, Xylas stood before the artifact, his eyes glowing with manic intensity. "You're too late, human," Xylas sneered, his voice echoing through the chamber. "The process has already begun, and I know all about your little connection to the energy source. You're the key, Hall, the catalyst that will unlock its full potential." Before Mark could react, Xylas unleashed a surge of energy, binding him to the artifact. A searing pain shot through his body, his senses overloaded. He tried to resist, but Xylas's power was too great. As Mark was pulled toward the artifact, he cried out in agony as he felt his mind being invaded and controlled. The artifact began to overload, its energy output spiraling out of control. The chamber shook violently, cracks appearing in the walls. The city outside was trembling. Estelle, having been recaptured, was dragged back into the chamber, forced to witness Xylas's descent into madness. She watched in horror as Mark writhed in agony, his body convulsing with energy. She knew that if Xylas succeeded, the consequences would be catastrophic. Then, as Mark was completely connected to the artifact, a flood of visions washed over him, overwhelming his senses. He saw the artifact's true purpose. It wasn't a weapon of destruction, but a gateway to another dimension. The artifact's energy slammed into Mark like a tidal wave, not of water, but of pure, raw sensation. Colors exploded behind his eyelids, hues that shouldn't exist, geometries that defied understanding. A cacophony of voices, alien and desperate, screamed in his mind, each one clawing for attention. His body vibrated, every nerve ending overloaded, threatening to shatter him from the inside out. But deep within the chaos, something flickered, a spark of human resilience. He'd faced worse. He'd stared down collapsing minds, analyzed seismic data under impossible deadlines, and argued with stubborn professors. This was just data, overwhelming, terrifying data, but data nonetheless. He compartmentalized, he focused, he filtered. Slowly, agonizingly, the chaos began to coalesce. The voices faded into a background hum, the colors willpowered into a single terrifying image, a swirling vortex of emerald and obsidian, a rent in the fabric of reality itself. The artifact wasn't just a weapon, it was a key to opening a portal. Estelle, watching Mark's torment and the manic gleam in Xylas's eyes, understood. Xylas wasn't just power-hungry, he was insane. And she knew how to hurt him. With a swift, practiced movement, she reached for a hidden panel on the artifact's control console. Decades of royal training, of memorizing schematics and emergency protocols, flooded back to her. She located the thermal regulator, a crucial component for maintaining the artifact's stability. With a sharp twist, she disabled it. A high-pitched whine filled the chamber as the artifact shuddered. The energy flow became erratic, sparking and crackling. Xylas roared, his face contorted with fury. "Guards, secure the princess." But Mark, though weakened, was still connected. He channeled the artifact's chaotic energy, focusing his will, shaping the surging power into a tight, coded burst. He aimed it towards the Eleni communication network, a desperate message flung into the void. Zyla's portal chamber. Enslavement. Zyla's eyes blazing turned his attention back to Estelle. You dare defy me, princess. You will learn the price of treason. He gestured to two hulking guards. Take her to the portal chamber. She will be the catalyst. Her royal blood will stabilize the gateway. As the guards moved to seize her, the feedback from Estelle's sabotage surged through Mark, amplifying his latent ability to sense and manipulate energy. It was a torrent, overwhelming, but he clung to it, wrestled it into a weapon. He focused on the energy field surrounding the portal chamber, a shimmering barrier designed to contain the artifact's power. He pushed, strained, disrupted. The energy field flickered, sputtered, and collapsed in sections, creating temporary gaps in its defenses. The disruption rippled outwards, affecting the minds of Zyla's guards. Confusion clouded their eyes, suspicion bloomed. One shoved another, accusing him of treachery. A brawl erupted, the guards turning on each other in a frenzy of paranoia. Estelle seized her chance. She ducked under a flailing arm, sprinted towards the shadows, but Zyla's was too quick. He intercepted her, grabbing her arm with a grip like iron. You cannot escape your destiny, princess. He dragged her towards the portal chamber, his voice dripping with malice. Soon, I will open the gateway to a new dimension, a dimension populated by a species ripe for enslavement. Their energy, their resources will be mine, and with their power I will rule the galaxy. Mark, still tethered to the artifact, felt it. He saw it. A vision flooded his mind. A world shrouded in shadow, its inhabitants chained and broken, their spirits crushed under the weight of Zyla's tyranny. Their silent screams echoed in his soul, fueling his commitment, but also draining his strength. The connection was a fire hose of pain, each enslaved soul a burning ember searing his consciousness. He gasped, sweat pouring down his face, his vision blurring. With a cruel smile, Zyla's produced a small, ornate device. Enough of this interference, human. He pressed a button and a beam of energy shot out, severing Mark's connection to the artifact. The visions vanished. The energy receded. The pain subsided, leaving only a hollow emptiness. Mark slumped to the floor, his body trembling, his pupils dilating. Darkness crept at the edges of his vision. As Mark fell unconscious, Zyla's laughed. Now, princess, witness the dawn of a new empire. He activated the portal. The air crackled, the ground vibrated. A swirling vortex of emerald and obsidian energy tore open in the center of the portal chamber, a gateway to the unknown. Estelle, desperate, lunged at Zyla's, a small energy blade appearing in her hand. She slashed at his arm, drawing a cry of pain, but she was too late. The portal was fully open. From the swirling vortex, grotesque figures began to emerge. Creatures of nightmare with razor-sharp claws, eyes that burned with malevolent intelligence, and bodies twisted into unnatural shapes. They shrieked, their voices grating on the ears, and charged into the stronghold, wreaking havoc and spreading terror. Estelle fought bravely, but she was overwhelmed. One of the creatures, larger and more powerful than the rest, seized her in its grasp. She struggled, but its grip was unbreakable. With a final, triumphant shriek, the creature leaped through the open portal, carrying Estelle with it into the swirling vortex of emerald and obsidian. Mark's head throbbed, a dull, persistent ache that echoed the distant rumble shaking the very floor beneath him. He blinked, his vision swimming, the air thick with the acrid scent of burnt ozone and something else, something feral. Groaning, he pushed himself up, his muscles screaming in protest. The stronghold, moments ago a symbol of Eleni power, was now a battlefield. Violet blood splattered the polished floors, illuminating the chaos with grotesque color. Eleni soldiers, their armor scorched and dented, fought with desperate ferocity against grotesque creatures that seemed to have been ripped from a nightmare. A wave of heat washed over him as Ryla, blaster rifle blazing, materialized beside him, her face grim. "Mark, you're awake." She fired a precise burst, felling a hulking beast with chitinous armor and razor-sharp claws. More poured through the shimmering, unstable portal, a grotesque torrent of teeth and fury. We've secured the area around you, but the situation is critical. He swayed, trying to focus. Estelle, where is she? Ryla's expression darkened. Xyla's, he took her, the portal. It's destabilizing. We don't know how long it will remain open. Mark's heart lurched. Estelle in that hellscape. He forced himself to stand, ignoring the wave of dizziness. I have to go after her. Ryla placed a hand on his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. You're in no condition. I'm going, he insisted, his voice strained but firm. He could feel it now, a faint, almost imperceptible pull, a resonance that led directly to her. His enhanced senses, still raw and untamed, were his only guide. I can feel her. Ryla hesitated, her duty warring with her concern. Damn it, Hall, fine, but you're not going alone. We'll provide support, but know this. We don't know what awaits us on the other side. This is a suicide mission. In the other dimension, a landscape of jagged obsidian peaks and sickly green skies, Xyla's was greeted as a liberator. Ragged figures, their bodies scarred and bearing the marks of brutal servitude, knelt before him, their eyes filled with a desperate hope. They were Draknar, the once proud inhabitants of this world, now enslaved by the krill-insected beings who thrived on their suffering. Our savior has arrived, croaked a Draknar elder, his voice raspy with disuse. The krill will fall before your might. Xyla's, bathed in the eerie green light, smiled, a chillingly false expression. Indeed, they will. I have come to offer you freedom. A new purpose. His gaze swept over the kneeling figures, calculating, assessing. He wasn't interested in liberation. He was interested in power. The Draknar would simply exchange one master for another. Estelle, her hands bound with energy shackles that suppressed her powers, was dragged through the krill fortress. The air was thick with the stench of decay and despair. She saw the Draknar, their spirits broken, toiling in the energy mines, their bodies emaciated, their eyes devoid of hope. The krill overseers, their carapaces gleaming with cruel satisfaction, lashed them with energy whips, the screams of the enslaved echoing through the fortress. She observed the conditions, cataloging every detail. The meager rations, the brutal punishments, the constant fear. But something else caught her attention, the energy itself. It pulsed through the fortress, a sickly green current that seemed to drain the life from the Draknar. It was harnessed by the krill, powering their weapons and their control systems. In the depths of the fortress, Estelle was thrown into a dimly lit cell. Already inside were a small group of Draknar, their eyes burning with a quiet defiance. They were the remnants of a rebellion, their plans thwarted, their leaders executed. You are the Eleni princess, said a Draknar female, her voice low and wary. Xyla's will use you to solidify his power. He believes he can, Estelle replied, her voice steady despite her fear. But I know his true nature. He is a manipulator, a destroyer. He will not liberate you, he will enslave you anew. The Draknar exchanged glances. What do you propose? Asked the female. I propose an alliance, Estelle said, her eyes shining with dedication. I offer you my knowledge of Xyla's, his weaknesses, his plans. In return, I ask for your help in disrupting his control over this fortress. And what makes you think we would trust you? Asked another Draknar, a male with a scarred face. Because, Estelle said, meeting his gaze, we both want the same thing, freedom. She learned that the fortress was powered by a central energy core, a massive crystal that pulsed with the sickly green energy. It not only powered the krill's technology, but also suppressed the Draknar's natural abilities, their connection to this world's unique energy. Xyla's plans to use our attunement to the energy to power his war machine, the Draknar female explained. He believes he can amplify our connection and use us as living batteries, both here and in your dimension. Back on the Eleni side, Mark, followed by Ryla and a small team of elite soldiers, stepped through the portal. The air slammed into them, a wave of oppressive heat and a stench that made Mark's stomach churn. The landscape was alien and hostile, a twisted mockery of nature. By the stars. Ryla breathed, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. Mark ignored the landscape, his senses focused on the faint pull, the resonance that led to Estelle. "This way," he said, his voice barely a whisper. They moved cautiously, their weapons raised, the silence broken only by the crunch of their boots on the obsidian ground and the distant screech of unseen creatures. They were ambushed by grotesque, insected creatures, their carapaces shimmering with the same sickly green energy that pulsed through the fortress. The creatures attacked with savage ferocity, their claws tearing through the air. The Alini soldiers fought bravely, their blasters spitting bolts of energy, but the creatures were relentless. Mark, his senses heightened, moved with unnatural speed, dodging attacks and disarming opponents. He felt a strange tingling in his hands, a surge of energy that mirrored the energy of this dimension. He experimented, focusing his will, channeling the energy. A faint shield shimmered into existence around him, deflecting a blast of energy from one of the creatures. The shield flickered, unstable, but it held. He could feel the energy, manipulate it, bend it to his will. As he fought, he noticed something else. The creatures, though savage, seemed controlled. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, as if they were puppets on strings. And he realized that the energy itself was the key. It wasn't just a power source, it was a conduit for control. "The creatures," he said, his voice strained. "They're being mind-controlled, the energy. It's a network." He also realized something else, something even more profound. The enslaved Draknar were biologically attuned to the energy of this dimension. It was in their blood, in their bones, in their very souls. It was what made them valuable to Xylas. Inside the fortress, Estelle, using her diplomatic skills, had gained the trust of the Draknar rebels. She explained Xylas's plans, his ambition to conquer both dimensions, his willingness to sacrifice anyone and anything to achieve his goals. "He plans to use our life force to fuel his machines of war," Estelle said. "We cannot let him succeed. We must disrupt the energy core." The Draknar nodded grimly. "The core is heavily guarded. We cannot reach it without help." "That's where my friends come in," Estelle said, a flicker of hope in her eyes. She learned that the fortress's layout included an energy distribution system, and that if they could overload that system, they would have an opening. Outside the fortress, Mark's group reached the perimeter, encountering heavy resistance. Xylas's forces, augmented by the mind-controlled creatures, were a formidable obstacle. Mark dodged another energy blast, the heat searing his skin. He realized the creatures were being controlled through the energy network, their minds enslaved, their wills broken. "We need a diversion," he said to Ryla, his voice urgent. "Something to draw their attention away from the main gate." Ryla nodded, her eyes narrowed in dedication. "We'll create one. But what then, Hall? How do we get inside?" Just then Estelle's voice crackled over Mark's comm. "Mark, can you hear me? Estelle, you're alive." "Barely. Listen carefully. We have a plan." "A plan that relies on chaos and your unique talents," Estelle finished, her gaze settling on Mark. "The fortress is heavily guarded, but Xylas's arrogance is his weakness. He believes his control is absolute." She unrolled a holographic map, projecting it onto the cavern wall. "This is the layout we've managed to piece together. The outer defenses are primarily automated turrets and bioengineered creatures. The creatures are the key." Turning to the assembled rebels, she said, "Our diversion will consist of coordinated strikes against the outer perimeter. We hit hard, we hit fast, and we draw his forces away from the central energy source. Every squad has a designated target and a precise timeline. Success depends on absolute coordination." Mark studied the map, his gaze drawn to the pulsing energy signatures emanating from the creatures. He frowned. "These creatures, they're not acting of their own volition, are they?" Estelle shook her head grimly. "Xylas controls them through a network of energy conduits. It's a crude but effective system." "Crude maybe," Mark muttered, "but not impenetrable." As Mark's team moved through the shadows, the air grew thick with the scent of ozone and something acrid, something unnatural. Mark held up a hand, halting the group. He closed his eyes, focusing, his senses expanding. He could feel the thrum of energy, the pulsing rhythm of the conduits, and the dull, listless minds of the creatures trapped within Xylas's control. He reached out, tentatively, with his own energy, mimicking the frequency of the conduits. It was a risky gamble, but the thought of those creatures, enslaved and forced to fight, spurred him on. He focused his will, amplifying his natural ability to manipulate energy, and sent a surge of counter-frequency into the network. A tremor ran through the ground. One of the hulking, armored creatures stumbled, its glowing eyes flickering. It roared, a sound of pain and confusion, then shook its massive head, as if waking from a nightmare. It turned towards Mark, its gaze clearing, and let out a low rumble that sounded suspiciously like gratitude. "What did you do?" One of Mark's team members whispered, his voice filled with awe. "Just gave them a little nudge," Mark replied, a grin spreading across his face. The freed creature lumbered closer, extending a clawed hand. Mark hesitated for a moment, then reached out and touched it. Images flooded his mind. The fortress's interior, the location of key control panels, the patrol routes of Xylas's guards. "Well, that's convenient," Mark said, relaying the information to his team. "Looks like we just got ourselves an inside track." As Estelle's diversion plan unfolded, explosions rocked the fortress. Alarms blared and the air crackled with energy fire. The rebels fought with a ferocity born of desperation, their attacks coordinated and precise. Xylas's forces, caught off guard, scrambled to respond, their ranks thinning as the rebels pressed their advantage. Mark's team reached the inner walls, only to be met with a hail of energy blasts. Xylas's elite guards stood ready, their weapons charged and their faces grim. Mark raised his hands, channeling his energy into a shimmering barrier that deflected the incoming fire. The barrier shimmered and buckled under the onslaught, but it held, giving his team time to advance. As the battle raged, a sudden, sharp pain lanced through Mark's mind. He stumbled, clutching his head, a vision flashing before his eyes. Estelle, surrounded by shadows, facing a figure of immense power. He could feel her fear, her perseverance, her danger. "Estelle!" He cried out, his voice filled with alarm. Estelle stood before Xylas in the heart of the fortress, the air thick with the stench of ozone. The chamber pulsed with raw energy, the walls shimmering with an unnatural light. "So, the princess finally reveals herself," Xylas sneered, his eyes burning with malevolent glee. "I had wondered when you would tire of playing rebel." "This ends here, Xylas," Estelle said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Xylas laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think you can stop me? I am about to unleash a power that will reshape this dimension. And then I will turn my gaze towards your precious Eleni homeworld. Your empire will fall before me." He lunged for Estelle, his hand outstretched, crackling with energy. Estelle sidestepped the attack, her movements fluid and precise. She struck back with a series of lightning-fast blows, her knowledge of Eleni martial arts proving surprisingly effective. One of her strikes connected with a control panel, sending sparks flying. The energy in the chamber flickered erratically. "You little insect!" Xylas roared, his face contorted with rage. Before he could retaliate, Estelle kicked out, shattering a key piece of equipment. The energy source sputtered, its power momentarily disrupted. Suddenly, a figure crashed through the chamber doors, his eyes blazing with energy. "Estelle!" Mark shouted. Xylas whirled around, his expression shifting from anger to surprise. How did you get past my defenses?" Mark didn't answer. He launched himself at Xylas, his fists crackling with energy. Their powers collided, creating shockwaves that shook the fortress to its foundations. "You are a fool, human," Xylas spat, deflecting Mark's attacks with ease. "You have no idea what you are dealing with." But then Xylas paused, narrowing his eyes. "That energy, it's unique. I've never sensed anything like it. You You are the key, aren't you? The key to controlling the energy source completely. With a surge of power, Xylas knocked Mark off his feet. Estelle rushed to his side, but Xylas grabbed her, holding her captive. "Don't move, human, or the princess gets hurt," Xylas snarled. "I need you alive, but she is expendable." He bound them both with energy restraints, dragging them towards the heart of the energy source. "You think you've won?" Mark growled, struggling against his bonds. "Victory is assured," Xylas replied, his voice dripping with malice. "Soon this dimension will be mine, and it's all thanks to you, human. Your life force will amplify the energy source to unimaginable levels. A fitting sacrifice, wouldn't you say? And you, princess, will have a front row seat to the dawn of my new empire." Xylas strapped Mark to a platform directly above the pulsing energy source, the air crackling with power. Estelle watched in horror, her heart pounding in her chest, as Xylas prepared to sacrifice Mark, leaving her helpless to stop him. The first tendrils of energy snaked across Mark's skin, burning like superheated wires. He focused his mind, fighting back a scream as the ritual took hold. The chamber pulsed with an unholy light, the air thick with the smell of ozone and something acrid like burning flesh's flesh. Estelle watched, her face a mask of horror. "Xylas, stop this. You swore an oath to protect our people, not to torture an innocent." Her voice, usually so regal, cracked with desperation. Xylas merely sneered, his eyes gleaming with manic energy. "Innocent. He is a catalyst, princess, a necessary component. The ends justify the means. Besides, he is not dying. He will merely be drained, utterly used, then discarded. A small price to pay for the salvation of our world." Despite the agony tearing through him, a flicker of awareness remained. Mark's geologist's mind, honed by years of analyzing rock formations, was picking apart the structure of the chamber. The energy conduits, the angles of the walls, the placement of the focusing crystals. Something was off. A subtle asymmetry, a deliberate imperfection. He focused, ignoring the searing pain, and subtly shifted his weight, pressing against the restraints. It was a minuscule movement, barely perceptible, but it was enough to alter the flow of energy just a fraction. A high-pitched whine echoed through the chamber, a barely audible tremor running through the floor. A feedback loop was forming. Estelle saw it, a flicker in Mark's eyes, a twitch of his bound hand. He was trying to tell her something. He had a plan. "Xylas," she said, forcing a calm tone, "the ritual. It could be improved. The energy flow is unstable. If we adjusted the primary focusing crystal, it would amplify the effect tenfold." Xylas paused, considering, perhaps, but any tampering could disrupt the process. "But the potential reward," Estelle pressed, "is far greater. Imagine the power to obliterate any threat to our people." Mark seized the moment. Focusing every ounce of his will, he amplified the energy conduit, channeling the raw power of the ritual into the flaw he had detected. The whine intensified, the tremor grew stronger. Cracks spiderwebbed across the floor. A deafening crack echoed as the energy overload caused a temporary shutdown of the force field that had previously been containing them. The entire room shook violently. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling. Estelle reacted instantly. With a speed that belied her regal bearing, she lunged at one of Xylas's guards, disarming him with a swift kick and snatching his energy pistol. "The conduits, Estelle," Mark gasped, his voice strained with pain. "The main junction near the north wall, overloaded." Estelle, trusting Mark's instincts, sprinted towards the designated point. She fired a precise shot at the junction, severing a key energy flow. The chamber plunged into near darkness, the ritual faltering. Xylas roared with fury. "Traitor!" He unleashed a blast of energy that sent Estelle flying, slamming her against a wall. Seeing Estelle vulnerable, Mark, fueled by a surge of adrenaline, tapped into the raw energy of the room. He focused his intent, picturing Xylas, picturing Estelle safe, and unleashed a torrent of power. The energy slammed into Xylas, knocking him back against the far wall, disrupting his control over the remaining guards. but the effort nearly incapacitated Mark. His vision swam, and his body felt like it was being torn apart from the inside. The guards, now freed from Xylas's direct control, hesitated, confusion etched on their faces. One, sensing an opportunity, turned on another and chaos erupted. Estelle, bruised but unbroken, dragged Mark towards what she hoped was an escape route. But their path was blocked by a pile of rubble, the result of the energy surge, and a still active energy field crackled ominously. Before they could find another way out, a squad of Xylas's elite guards materialized, reinforced by heavily armed robots. They advanced, weapons raised. Xylas, slowly rising to his feet, brushed off his robes, his eyes burning with cold fury. "Impressive human," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "But futile. I have contingencies." He held out his hand, and the residual energy in the chamber flowed towards him, coalescing around his form. "I can absorb and redirect energy, human. Your attacks are useless against me." He then gestured towards Mark, "And now I shall use you as you used the energy, as a conduit. I shall use you as a living battery to power a weapon capable of wiping your precious Estelle's homeworld from existence. It is also unfortunate that your blood is the only substance that can amplify it to that extent. The irony is almost too much to bear." Xylas began extracting Mark's blood. Not just drawing it, but pulling it, the advanced technology amplifying its energy-conducting properties to a searing, agonizing degree. Each pulse of the machine felt like molten iron coursing through his veins. "The irony," Xylas's voice dripped with cold amusement, "is that your unique physiology, the very thing that makes you so resilient, is also what makes you so conductive. Your blood is the key to destabilizing the Alini's terraforming grids, a weapon capable of rendering our homeworld uninhabitable." Through the haze of pain, Mark saw Estelle straining against the shimmering energy field that held her captive. She hurled herself against it, a desperate, silent scream on her face, only to be thrown back each time, the force of the barrier leaving angry red welts on her blue skin. Despite the excruciating pain, Mark focused. He was a geologist, a scientist. Pain was data. He analyzed the energy field, the way it pulsed, the subtle shifts in its electromagnetic signature. His knowledge of physics, honed over years of studying the Earth's magnetic fields, gave him a framework, a language to decipher the alien technology. He noticed a subtle frequency modulation, a rhythmic pulse beneath the surface hum. Estelle, panting, her eyes locked on Mark's, subtly tilted her head towards one of the guards monitoring them. He was younger than the others, his mandibles less pronounced, his posture stiff and unnatural. He avoided eye contact, his gaze darting nervously around the room. There was a flicker of something in his expression, discomfort, regret. Estelle shifted her focus to the guard. "Jorek," she said, her voice clear and strong despite her confinement. "You seem troubled. Does the prospect of destroying our homeworld sit easily with you?" The guard, Jorek, flinched. "Princess," he stammered, I am merely following orders." "Orders from Xylas." Estelle pressed, her voice softening, appealing to his sense of Alini honor. "Orders that will condemn our people to extinction. Is this the Alini way? To destroy what we have built, to succumb to petty squabbles and internal strife?" Jorek's gaze flickered to Xylas, then back to Estelle. I never wanted this. I was assigned to his detail. I voiced my concerns, but he assured me that this was for the greater good, that you were a threat, princess, that this human was a danger to us all." He looked down, shame etched on his face. "I regret that you were captured." Mark, still battling the pain, realized something, the frequency modulation. It wasn't random. It was tied to Xylas's personal energy signature, a subtle bioelectric pulse that resonated with the field. He could use that. He could create an opposing frequency, a counter-pulse to disrupt the field. Estelle, seeing the spark of understanding in Mark's eyes, turned back to Jorek. "There is still time to do what is right." Xylas is blinded by ambition, by a lust for power. He does not see the destruction he is about to unleash. But you do, Jorek. I can see it in your eyes. She paused, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. If you could subtly disrupt the energy flow to the field generator just for a moment, I believe this human can use his abilities to collapse the field, at least temporarily. Jorek hesitated, his mandibles clicking nervously. Xylas will know. He will not hesitate to kill us all. He swallowed hard. But you are right. This is not the Eleni way. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a small data slate. This is a rudimentary map of the facility's energy grid. I can reroute a small amount of power, create a momentary instability, but it must be precise, and it will only last for a fraction of a cycle. Jorek subtly manipulated the controls on his console, rerouting a small amount of energy from the primary power conduit to a secondary buffer. The lights flickered momentarily, almost imperceptibly. Mark focused his mental energy, channeling his pain, his knowledge, his will into a single, coherent frequency. He visualized the energy field, its intricate lattice of particles, and projected the counter-frequency he had discovered, a dissonant chord in the field's harmonic structure. The energy field flickered, sputtered, and weakened, its shimmering surface momentarily losing its cohesion. Estelle seized the opportunity. With a roar of effort, she hurled herself at the weakest point in the field, striking it with a concentrated burst of bioenergy. A small opening appeared, a fleeting tear in the fabric of the energy barrier, but it wasn't large enough for both of them to escape. "Estelle, go," Mark gasped, his voice strained with pain. "You're more valuable to them than I am. You can rally support against Xylas." "Get out of here." Estelle hesitated, her eyes filled with anguish. "I cannot leave you. You have to," Mark insisted. "They need you. Promise me you'll come back with reinforcements." Tears welled in Estelle's eyes. "I promise," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I will return." With a final, desperate look at Mark, she squeezed through the opening and vanished into the corridor beyond. As Estelle escaped, Xylas sensed the disruption. He whirled around, his eyes blazing with fury. "Jorek," he roared, "you treacherous cur, I knew you had doubts." Jorek stood his ground, his mandibles trembling. "I only sought to ensure that your methods were ethical," he stammered, "that the destruction of our homeworld was not the price of your ambition." Before Jorek could say another word, Xylas gestured sharply, and two guards seized him, their energy weapons pointed at his head. "You were a fool to think you could deceive me," Xylas sneered. "I knew you had reservations. That is why these guards were ordered to monitor you." Enraged by Estelle's escape and Jorek's betrayal, Xylas turned his attention back to Mark. He increased the energy extraction, pushing the human closer to his limits. The pain intensified, blurring Mark's vision, stealing his breath. With a flick of his wrist, Xylas reinforced the energy field, making it even more impenetrable than before. "You will not escape again, human," he hissed. "Your blood will power my weapon, and your death will be a footnote in the history of the Eleni Empire." Before leaving, Xylas leaned in close, his voice a venomous whisper. "And do not think that your princess will be able to save you. I have already spread misinformation throughout the court. She is discredited, painted as a traitor. You are portrayed as a dangerous invader. No one will believe her." Mark, weakened, in agony and utterly alone, was left in the reinforced energy field, facing the imminent threat of being drained of his blood and used to power Xylas's weapon of mass destruction. The energy field thrummed against Mark's skin, a constant, agonizing vibration that threatened to tear him apart cell by cell. He coughed, the metallic tang of blood coating his tongue. The air tasted sterile, recycled, and utterly hopeless. But Mark Hall wasn't one to surrender to hopelessness. He scanned the cramped cell, his geologist's mind cataloging every detail, every potential resource. Scraps of twisted metal littered the floor, remnants of the temple, no doubt. Discarded energy cells, drained but not entirely inert, lay scattered in a corner. His gaze lingered on a length of frayed wire snaking from a broken light fixture. He remembered high school physics, a lifetime ago. Faraday cages, shielding. It was a long shot, but it was something. Working with clumsy, energy-drained movements, he began to weave the wire and metal scraps into a crude cage around himself, a desperate attempt to deflect the energy field. Each movement was agony, each breath a struggle, but he persisted, driven by the stubborn refusal to simply accept his fate. As he worked, his mind drifted back to his geology lectures, specifically the section on tectonic stress and energy release. This alien energy felt familiar, a raw, untamed power, similar to the forces that shaped continents and triggered earthquakes. Was Xylas attempting to weaponize something akin to a planetary core? The thought was terrifying. Meanwhile, light years away, Estelle materialized back into the sterile, gleaming corridors of the Eleni capital. Relief warred with annoying dread. She had to reach her father, had to warn him. But as she tried to access the central communication network, a cold wave of realization washed over her. Access denied. She tried again, bypassing the standard protocols, using her royal authority. Still nothing. Restricted access, unauthorized user. Panic tightened its grip. She rushed towards the Emperor's private comm channel only to find it equally blocked. Estelle slammed a fist against the smooth metallic wall. Xylas had moved quickly, too quickly. The reason became clear as she glanced at a nearby holoscreen. Her own face, distorted and grim, stared back at her. Beneath it, scrolling text screamed accusations. Princess Estelle, traitor to the Empire, collusion with human terrorist. The image shifted to mark fabricated scenes of him destroying Eleni monuments flashing across the screen. Doctored evidence. Lies spun into a web of deceit. The propaganda was working. As Estelle hurried through the corridors, she saw Eleni guards eyeing her with suspicion, their hands hovering near their energy weapons. The fear in their eyes was unmistakable. The broadcast cut to a live feed of Jorek standing before a tribunal, his face pale but resolute. Xylas's voice, amplified and booming, filled the chamber. Jorek, former captain of the guard, stands accused of treason, aiding and abetting a known terrorist and conspiring against the Empire. His sentence, imprisonment followed by execution. Let this be a warning to all who would betray the Emperor and the Eleni people. Estelle gasped, her heart twisting with guilt. Jorek had risked everything for her, and now he was paying the price. She had to do something. She sought out her most trusted advisors, individuals who had served her faithfully for years. But as she pleaded her case, she saw the hesitation in their eyes, the fear that mirrored that of the guards. "Princess, we admire your courage," one stammered, "but Xylas. He has the Emperor's ear. To defy him, it would be suicide." Back in his cell, Mark completed his makeshift Faraday cage. It was pathetic, a flimsy web of metal and hope. But as he huddled inside, he felt a marginal decrease in the energy field's intensity. A flicker of triumph ignited within him. It wasn't much, but it bought him time. Time to think. Time to find a way out. Estelle, defeated by the court, knew she couldn't rely on the established power structures. Xylas had infiltrated them too deeply. She had to find allies outside the capital, loyalists who hadn't been swayed by his propaganda. She thought of Kai, a childhood friend, a brilliant technician who had always chafed under the Empire's rigid control. He had a knack for bypassing security systems, a rebellious streak that ran deep. He lived in a remote outpost far from Xylas's reach. It was a long shot, but it was her only hope. Estelle found Kai tinkering with a grav bike, his hands stained with grease. He looked up, surprised to see her. "Estelle, what are you doing here? It's not safe for you." "I need your help, Kai," she said, her voice urgent. She explained everything, the temple, Mark, Xylas's lies, Jorek's imprisonment. Kai listened, his expression growing increasingly grim. Xylas is powerful, Estelle, he said, shaking his head. To go against him, it's madness. I know, Estelle said, her voice cracking. But Jorek is going to die and the Emperor is being manipulated. I can't just stand by and watch. She reached out, taking his hand. We were friends, Kai, please help me. Kai looked into her eyes, saw the desperation and the unwavering conviction. He sighed, the fight draining out of him. All right, he said, I'll help you, but this is insane. Working together, they bypassed the communication blockade, Kai's fingers flying across the console, his knowledge of the system unparalleled. Finally, Estelle had a clear channel. She sent a coded message to a small resistance group operating in the outer territories, a plea for help, a desperate gamble, but Xylas was watching. His network of surveillance was vast, his reach absolute. The message was intercepted within seconds. Dispatch forces to intercept the resistance group, he ordered, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. And investigate Kai. I suspect he's involved in this conspiracy. Mark, back in his cell, his mind racing, remembered a childhood trick he'd learned from his grandfather, an old electrician, creating static electricity with simple materials. Could he use the drained energy cells to generate a small electromagnetic pulse, disrupt the energy field even for a moment? It was a dangerous idea, potentially suicidal, but he was running out of options. He carefully connected the wires, channeling the residual energy from the cells into a makeshift capacitor. The air crackled with ozone. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. This was it. He slammed the wires together. A blinding flash filled the cell, followed by a deafening surge of energy. The extraction device sputtered and sparked, overloaded by the sudden surge. A small explosion ripped through the cell, shattering the energy field, collapsing his Faraday cage, and sending Mark crashing to the floor, unconscious. Estelle, knowing time was running out, made a desperate decision. She would confront Xylas directly, expose his lies to the Emperor, even if it meant walking into a trap. She managed to reach the Emperor's palace, her heart pounding in her chest. But as she approached the throne room, Xylas stepped out, blocking her path. His face was a mask of cold triumph. Estelle, he said, his voice dripping with false concern, I'm afraid I must place you under arrest. Before she could react, guards swarmed her, their energy weapons trained on her. Xylas turned to the Emperor, who sat on his throne, his expression unreadable. Your Majesty, Xylas said, his voice ringing with authority. I have uncovered irrefutable evidence of Princess Estelle's treason. She has been conspiring with a known terrorist, attempting to destabilize the Empire, and as we speak, attempting an assassination on your life. He gestured to a holoscreen which displayed more fabricated images, more distorted truths. The Emperor watched, his face impassive. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy with disappointment. Estelle, he said, is this true? Estelle stared at her father, her heart breaking. She saw no warmth in his eyes, no trust, only cold suspicion. Father, you must listen to me, she pleaded, but her words were drowned out by Xylas's smooth voice. I'm afraid the evidence speaks for itself, Your Majesty, Xylas said, his gaze never leaving Estelle's. I recommend immediate imprisonment pending a full investigation. The Emperor sighed, a sound of weary resignation. Guards, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Take her away. Estelle was seized, her protests ignored. As she was dragged away, she glanced back at her father, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. He didn't meet her gaze. Unconscious and imprisoned, Mark was unaware of the events unfolding in the capital. And Estelle, stripped of her power and her freedom, faced a bleak and uncertain future. Estelle sat on the cold stone floor, the energy dampeners a dull ache against her skin. Failed, she thought, the word echoing in the silence of her cell. I failed them all, her father. Could he truly believe Xylas's lies, or was this a calculated sacrifice? No, she couldn't afford to dwell on betrayal. Xylas had to be stopped regardless. She stood, her royal robes suddenly feeling like shackles. Across the prison block, Mark groaned, his head throbbing. The cell reeked of ozone and burnt metal. He pushed himself up, noticing the energy bars were still intact, but the surge had clearly overloaded something. Fragments of the wall, fused and blackened, lay scattered around. But it wasn't just the damage that caught his eye. The energy discharge had spiderwebbed across the power conduits, exposing the underlying structure. He recognized the pattern, a complex network designed for energy extraction. He ran his fingers over the scorched metal, a geologist's instinct seeking in. This wasn't just a prison, it was a component of something much larger. Meanwhile, Xylas addressed the assembled Eleni court, his voice amplified to fill the grand hall. Holographic images of the traitoress, Estelle, flickered behind him. Her actions threatened the very stability of our empire, but thanks to the vigilance of the guard, she has been apprehended. I assure you, the Eleni are safe. Back in her cell, Estelle ran her hands along the smooth, cold walls, searching for any imperfection. Near the back, hidden behind a loose stone panel, she found it. A narrow ventilation shaft, barely wide enough to squeeze through. A sliver of hope pierced through her despair. Mark, still examining the damaged conduits, noticed something else. Etched into the metal, almost invisible to the naked eye, were schematics. He zoomed in with his enhanced vision, recognizing the layout of a weapon, an energy weapon, designed to focus the extracted power into a devastating blast. The schematics clearly indicated the target, a neighboring Eleni colony, identified by its sector coordinates. Estelle, gritting her teeth, managed to pry open the panel and slip into the ventilation shaft. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. The shaft twisted and turned, forcing her to crawl on her hands and knees. Suddenly, a red laser grid flickered into existence, blocking her path. Security measures. Xylas wasn't taking any chances. Determined, Mark began formulating a plan. He needed to create a diversion, something big enough to draw attention away from Estelle and perhaps expose Xylas's scheme. He focused on the damaged power grid in his cell. If he could overload it again, push it past its breaking point. Deeper in the ventilation system, Estelle heard a muffled sob. She followed the sound to a small alcove where she found another prisoner, a frail Eleni woman with haunted eyes. "I am Lyra," she whispered. "I was a scientist until I questioned Xylas's research. They said I was spreading sedition." Mark, using a shard of metal from the wall, began carefully short-circuiting the power conduits in his cell. Sparks flew, and the air crackled with energy. He timed his actions carefully, waiting for the prison's power grid to cycle. Then, with a final surge, he unleashed the overload. The lights flickered, died, and plunged the prison block into darkness. Alarms blared. Estelle helped Lyra to her feet. "We need to work together," she said. "I know a way out of here." Lyra, her eyes widening with a flicker of hope, nodded. "I know the ventilation system's layout. I can guide us." The alarms had barely stopped blaring when Xylas stormed into the prison control room. "Seal off all sectors. Find Estelle. She must not escape." He dispatched a squad of elite guards, their energy rifles charged and ready. In the darkness, Mark worked quickly, rerouting the prison's internal communication system. He patched into a secure channel, hoping against hope that someone loyal to the Emperor was still listening. He transmitted a coded message. "Temple fell by design. Weapon targets Xantus colony. Xylas orchestrates." Estelle and Lyra reached a junction in the ventilation system. Before them, a heavily guarded exit point shimmered with a powerful energy shield. Two guards stood watch, their rifles trained on the narrow opening. On the other side of the city, in a hidden safe house, Kai received Mark's coded message. He looked at his fellow rebels, their faces grim but determined. "She's alive," he said, his voice filled with renewed hope. "And she needs our help." Estelle, drawing on her training as a warrior princess, whispered instructions to Lyra. Together, they fashioned improvised weapons from pieces of metal they had found in the ventilation shaft. Then, with a silent nod, they launched their attack. Mark, listening through the prison's communication system, overheard a conversation between two guards. "The Xantus colony," one said, "but that's where the Emperor's brother lives with his family." The pieces clicked into place. Xylas wasn't just seizing power, he was eliminating rivals. Estelle and Lyra fought with desperate courage, taking down one guard and disabling the energy shield. But as they reached the exit, Xylas himself appeared, blocking their path. "I expected this," he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "You always were predictable, Estelle." Suddenly, the prison shook as explosions rocked the outer walls. The resistance had arrived, creating a diversion. Xylas cursed under his breath. He raised his hand, preparing to execute Estelle and Lyra when a holographic image flickered into existence beside him. It was Mark, his face grim but resolute. "Emperor Thuron," Mark said, his voice echoing through the prison. "I have evidence that Xylas is plotting against you and the Empire. He orchestrated the temple's collapse and intends to destroy the Xantus colony. I am transmitting schematics now." A stunned silence fell over the prison. Xylas's face contorted with rage. The Emperor's image flickered, his expression unreadable. "Xylas," he said, his voice heavy with suspicion. "Stand down. I order a temporary ceasefire. I want answers." The order echoed through the prison complex, momentarily silencing the hum of the energy weapon. Xylas's violet eyes narrowed, but he inclined his head. "As the Emperor commands," he said, his voice filled with barely concealed contempt. He barked an order at a nearby guard. "Inform Investigator Valerius that I will personally escort him to appropriate locations for his inquiry." He turned, a predatory smile playing on his lips. "A temporary reprieve, Princess. Enjoy it while it lasts." As Xylas strode away, Estelle met Mark's gaze across the chamber. A flicker of hope ignited within her, quickly tempered by the cold reality of their situation. Moments later, Xylas guided Investigator Valerius through the prison. The investigator, a portly Aleni with nervous antennae, scanned the pristine corridors, seemingly reassured. Xylas pointed to a holding cell, meticulously cleaned and staged with fabricated evidence. "As you can see, investigator, these prisoners were treated with the utmost respect. Their claims of torture are regrettable exaggerations born of desperation." He subtly gestured, and a guard activated a holographic display showing doctored security footage. In his cell, Mark wrestled with the prison's archaic communication system. He bypassed several layers of encryption, his fingers flying across the alien interface. Finally, a connection flickered to life. He routed the signal through multiple channels, hoping to avoid detection. "Kai," he whispered, his voice tight with urgency. "The targeting system. It's vulnerable. Focus your attack on the energy conduits leading to the aiming array. A concentrated burst should overload the system." He transmitted the schematics, highlighting the weak point. On a hidden moon, Kai received the message. His brow furrowed as he studied the schematics. "He's right," he murmured to his lieutenant. "A precision strike. It's risky, but it could work." He addressed his troops, his voice ringing with purpose. "Prepare for a revised assault. Our target is no longer the prison itself, but the weapon's targeting system." Back in the prison, Estelle, despite her restraints, held her head high. She addressed the other prisoners, her voice clear and resonant. "People of Ilion, we have been betrayed, imprisoned, and face imminent death at the hands of a madman. But we are not defeated. We will not surrender our hope. We will resist in every way we can." A murmur of agreement rippled through the cells, faces lighting up with newfound willpower. Lyra, her normally bright eyes now clouded with worry, approached Estelle. "The prison's internal systems. They are old, Princess. The ventilation shafts. They are interconnected and poorly secured. We could use them to create a distraction." Sweat beaded on Mark's forehead as he continued to analyze the weapon schematics. A chilling realization dawned on him. He accessed another layer of code, a hidden failsafe. His blood ran cold. If Xylas were incapacitated, the weapon would automatically fire. On the neighboring colony, home to millions of innocent Eleni, the Emperor's investigator, thoroughly misled by Xylas, transmitted his report. The prisoner's claims appear unfounded, Your Majesty. Xylas has assured me that the weapon is under control and poses no threat. Suddenly, the prison shuddered as Kai's resistance group launched their revised attack. Energy blasts slammed against the prison's shields, focusing on the targeting array. The prison defenses retaliated with brutal force, cutting down resistance fighters. Inside, Estelle and Lyra, aided by other prisoners, triggered a series of explosions within the ventilation system. Alarms blared as smoke filled the corridors, obscuring vision and sowing chaos. Guards scrambled to contain the uprising, their attention diverted from Mark's location. Taking advantage of the confusion, Mark slipped out of his cell and navigated the labyrinthine corridors, heading towards the energy extraction device. He reached the central chamber, the air thick with ozone and the scent of burning metal. He began to sabotage the device, rerouting energy flows and overloading circuits. Xylas, watching the attack unfold on a holographic display, snarled, "Fools! They think they can stop me." He barked an order. "Bypass the targeting system, prepare for manual firing." The Emperor, watching the events unfold from his command center, hesitated. Valerius's report took a toll on him. "Xylas, are you certain this is necessary? Can you provide further proof of their treachery?" With a final surge of effort, Mark disrupted the energy extraction process. A blinding flash of light filled the chamber, followed by a deafening roar. The energy weapon sputtered and died, plunging the prison into darkness for a fleeting moment. But the disruption triggered the failsafe. A countdown timer appeared on the weapon's control panel, ticking down to 0. Xylas, enraged, stormed into the holding cell where Estelle and Lyra were confined. He grabbed them roughly, dragging them towards the weapon's control room. "If I am to die today, you will die with me and your precious colony will be reduced to ashes." Mark, scrambling to his feet, managed to access a hidden communication channel. He transmitted a desperate message to the Emperor. "Your Majesty, Xylas has activated a failsafe. If he is stopped, the weapon will automatically fire on the neighboring colony. Millions will die. You must stop him, but you must also prevent the failsafe from activating." The Emperor, finally convinced of Xylas's treachery, issued a desperate order. "Arrest Xylas, prevent the weapon from firing, do everything in your power." But it was too late. The failsafe sequence had been initiated. Xylas, his face contorted with hatred, reached for the manual override controls. He prepared to unleash the weapon's full fury on the unsuspecting colony. Estelle, her eyes filled with steely perseverance, managed to subtly flick her wrist, activating a hidden transmitter in her bracelet. The signal, weak but unmistakable, pulsed through the prison's communication network. It was a coded message, a desperate plea. Now, in the heart of the prison, surrounded by chaos and destruction, Mark braced himself. He knew what he had to do. He knew the risks were astronomical, but he was human, and he wouldn't let millions die if there was even the slightest chance to stop it. The door slammed shut, a solid wall of plasteel hissing as it sealed. Impenetrable. Damn it. Mark roared, slamming a fist against the unyielding surface. The metal vibrated, mocking him. Inside, he could see Xylas, a manic glint in his eyes, already inputting commands into the weapon's console. Estelle stood beside him, her face a mask of desperate pleading. Outside the control room, chaos reigned. The acrid smell of ionized air stung Mark's nostrils, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. Disoriented guards stumbled through the corridors, victims of Estelle's diversion, but their numbers were quickly recovering. Red energy bolts flashed, ricocheting off the walls as the Emperor's forces engaged Xylas's loyalists in a brutal firefight. The prison, once a symbol of order, was now a war zone. A holographic display flickered to life above the doorway, stark red numbers counting down with merciless precision. 00:07:32. 7 minutes and 32 seconds until the failsafe detonated, vaporizing the colony on the neighboring planet. A guttural roar echoed down the corridor. Kai's remaining soldiers, faces grim, charged past Mark, weapons blazing, drawing the attention of more guards. "Get to him, human. We'll hold them back." Kai yelled before disappearing around a corner, swallowed by the melee. Automated turrets swiveled into position, their targeting lasers painting the corridor in a deadly grid. Energy barriers shimmered into existence, blocking any direct approach to the control room. Xylas had turned the prison into a fortress. Mark's gaze darted around, assessing the situation with a geologist's eye. He ran a hand along the cold plasteel wall, feeling for any imperfection, any weakness. His fingers brushed against a hairline fracture, almost invisible to the naked eye. He pressed harder, feeling the subtle give of the material beneath. "Lyra, can you hear me?" He barked into his comm. "Loud and clear, Mark. What's the situation?" Her voice, though calm, betrayed a tremor of fear. "I need schematics of the ventilation system, specifically around the control room. I think I've found a structural weakness in the wall." Inside the control room, Estelle stepped closer to Xylas, her voice soft but firm. "Xylas, please, you don't have to do this. This isn't the way." Xylas didn't even glance at her, his fingers flying across the console. "Silence, princess. You are blinded by your affection for this. Humanity is a disease spreading across the galaxy, consuming everything in its path. We must protect the Aleni, even if it means making difficult choices." Lyra's voice crackled in Mark's ear. "Got it, Mark. Sending schematics now. There's a maintenance access tunnel running parallel to the control room, about 5 meters behind the wall you're touching. It's a tight fit, but it should bypass most of the defenses." Mark nodded, already visualizing the tunnel system. "Thanks, Lyra, I owe you one." He activated the micro cutter on his wrist, the small laser humming to life. He traced the hairline fracture, widening it, deepening it, until a thin line of molten metal dripped down the wall. The alarms blared, announcing the arrival of the Emperor's flagship in orbit. A booming voice echoed through the prison. "Xylas, this is Emperor Thuron. Stand down immediately. Surrender and release the princess." Xylas ignored the command, his focus solely on the console. A shimmering energy shield enveloped his body, deflecting stray energy bolts. He raised his hand, preparing to override the failsafe. Mark braced himself, muscles screaming in protest. He slammed his shoulder against the weakened section of the wall again and again, until the plasteel buckled and cracked. With a final, desperate heave, he burst through, sending shards of metal flying. He landed hard inside a cramped maintenance area, face to face with 2 of Xylas's elite guards, their energy weapons trained on his chest. Xylas's voice, amplified by the prison's comm system, dripped with disdain. "So the human cockroach finally emerges from his hole." Mark ignored him, focusing on the guards. He dodged the first energy blast, the heat searing his skin. He retaliated with a swift kick, sending one guard sprawling. The second lunged, but Mark sidestepped the attack, disarming him with a brutal twist of the wrist. He grabbed the fallen weapon, firing a short burst, dropping both guards before they could react. His side throbbed where an energy bolt had grazed him, but he pushed through the pain. Inside the control room, Estelle saw her chance. While Xylas was distracted, she reached for a hidden control panel beneath the console, her fingers dancing across the surface. A small, almost imperceptible disruption rippled through the energy field surrounding Xylas. Mark, seizing the moment, hurled a device he'd cobbled together from prison components, a jury-rigged EMP grenade towards Xylas. The device detonated with a flash, disrupting the delicate circuitry of the manual firing sequence. Alarms blared as systems momentarily crashed and rebooted. The prison shook as the Emperor's forces began their boarding action, breaching the outer defenses and engaging Xylas' troops in close-quarters combat. Xylas, enraged by Mark's interference and the arrival of the boarding party, hit his fist on the console, initiating a full lockdown of the control room. The heavy plasteel doors hissed shut, sealing himself inside with Estelle. 00:03:17. The countdown continued, inexorable. 3 minutes and 17 seconds. Mark reached the control room door, smacking his fist against the cold metal. It was impenetrable. Inside, he could see Xylas, his face contorted with rage, his hand hovering over the override controls. Estelle stood beside him, trapped, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and a desperate plea for help. Mark examined the control room door. Reinforced plasteel, at least a meter thick, gleamed under the emergency lights. An advanced locking mechanism, a web of interwoven energy conduits and physical bolts, was embedded in the frame. He ran a hand along the cool metal, feeling for weaknesses, scanning the cramped maintenance alcove for anything resembling a tool. A discarded energy cell, a tangle of cut wires, a corroded wrench, slim pickings, but enough. Time was a luxury he couldn't afford. Scavenging the meager supplies, Mark began assembling a makeshift device. He jury-rigged the energy cell to the wires, channeling its power into a crude antenna fashioned from the wrench. His goal, a concentrated electromagnetic pulse designed to fry the door's control panel. Inside the control room, Estelle stood before Xylas, her voice tinged with sorrow. "Xylas, please, this isn't you. We were friends, brothers and sisters in the Guard. What has happened?" Xylas's face, etched with fanaticism, hardened. "Friendship is a luxury we can no longer afford, Princess. Don't you see? They'll consume us, strip our planet bare, dilute our bloodline. Humans are a plague, and this is the only cure." The failsafe detonation timer flashed. 7:00. Red numerals burned against the console. Mark positioned the EMP device against the wall, as close to the control panel as possible. He took a deep breath and slammed the exposed wires together. The device sputtered, then unleashed a surge of raw electromagnetic energy. The corridor plunged into momentary darkness. Lights flickered erratically, casting dancing shadows. Wires sparked and hissed, releasing the acrid scent of ozone. The door panel smoked, its intricate circuitry momentarily overwhelmed. A roar of fury echoed from within the control room. "He's here, seal the door." Mark didn't wait. Knowing the EMP's effects were temporary, he jammed the corroded wrench, his makeshift lever, into the damaged locking mechanism. Gritting his teeth, he forced the wrench, manually overriding several of the locking bolts. Groaning metal protested under the strain. A crackle from Lyra's voice in his ear. "Mark, the Emperor's boarding party is engaged on Deck 7. Xylas's loyalists are putting up heavy resistance. They won't be able to reach you in time." Casualties were mounting, the price of loyalty to a madman. "Understood," Mark grunted, muscles straining. Lyra's voice again, a moment later. "Xylas is moving toward the primary weapon control console. He seems to be attempting a manual override." Mark threw his weight against the door, heaving with every ounce of strength. The remaining locking bolts, weakened but still engaged, held firm. His vision swam with exertion. Inside, Estelle saw her opportunity. While Xylas barked orders at his men, she subtly reached behind the console and yanked a thick, insulated power cable free. The console flickered, then died. The failsafe timer ticked down relentlessly. 4:52. Alarms blared, a cacophony of impending doom. Xylas spun around, his eyes narrowing as he registered the disconnected cable. His face contorted, the righteous conviction replaced by a furious, betrayed snarl. "Estelle, how dare you?" With a final, desperate surge, Mark pried the control room door open just enough to create a narrow gap, a sliver of hope. He could see Xylas, weapon raised, his face a mask of rage. Xylas, consumed by fury, leveled his energy weapon and fired a searing blast directly at the opening in the door, targeting Mark. Estelle, reacting on pure instinct, hurled herself in front of Mark, intercepting the full force of the energy blast. The concussive force threw Mark backward, slamming him against the opposite wall. He gasped for breath, ears ringing. Through the haze, he saw Estelle collapse to the floor, her ceremonial robe smoking, her face pale with pain. The weapon, its energy flow disrupted by Estelle's sacrifice, misfired, sending a chaotic wave of energy surging through the control room. "Estelle!" Mark shouted, his voice cracking. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands flying over her violet armor, desperately searching for the source of the energy blast. The air crackled with ozone, stinging his nostrils. His fingers brushed against a patch of melted armor near her abdomen, the heat radiating even through his gloves. A deafening alarm blared through the control room, accompanied by the screech of failing machinery. Lights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows across the consoles. Through the reinforced viewport, Mark saw several containment cells in the prison complex swing open, revealing shadowy figures emerging into the corridors. The misfired energy weapon had triggered a cascading power surge. Remembering his rudimentary first aid training, Mark tore a strip of fabric from his undershirt. Using fragments of shattered console plating surprisingly smooth, almost glassy, from the energy blast he fashioned a makeshift compress, applying firm pressure to the wound in Estelle's armor. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the rising tide of panic. "Hall!" Lyra's voice cut through the chaos. "The prison's energy containment field is destabilizing. Multiple high-threat prisoners are escaping their cells. We need to move now." Ignoring her, Mark grabbed the Eleni medical scanner he'd salvaged from the maintenance area. Its smooth, cool surface offered a small comfort against the burning fear in his gut. The scanner hummed to life, projecting a holographic image of Estelle's internal systems. The energy weapon had not only burned through her armor, but had also released a cocktail of exotic toxins into her bloodstream. He cross-referenced the scanner's database with his geological knowledge, recognizing structural similarities between the toxins and certain rare earth minerals. Working quickly, his hands surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him, Mark began stripping components from the scanner. He knew the basic chemical compounds. It was all about isolating and neutralizing the specific reactions. He mixed the compounds in a small, jury-rigged container, creating a temporary antidote. He injected it into Estelle's arm through a port in her armor. Her breathing, ragged and shallow, evened slightly. She remained unconscious. The control room doors hissed open, and Emperor Thuron strode in, flanked by heavily armed Eleni guards. They moved with practiced efficiency, securing the area and subduing Xylas's remaining loyalists. But Xylas was gone. Taking advantage of the chaos caused by the prison break, he had slipped away, disappearing into the prison's labyrinthine corridors. Mark glimpsed him for a fleeting moment, a flash of crimson armor disappearing around a corner. Before being subdued, however, Xylas had activated a secondary failsafe protocol. The alarms intensified, and the lights flickered more violently. Lyra cursed in Eleni. "He's further disrupting the prison systems. The energy containment field is collapsing faster. The protocol targets a specific section," Lyra said, her voice tight with urgency. "Section Gamma 9. It houses an experimental research lab. They've been experimenting on the energy source itself." Mark's mind raced. An experimental lab? What were they doing with the energy source? "What is it?" Lyra exchanged a look with the Emperor. "It's complicated. We believed it was merely a power source, a highly efficient and stable form of energy, but it's not just a power source," Mark interrupted, his voice low. "It's a sentient life form, and they're trying to weaponize it." The Emperor's expression hardened. He barked orders in Eleni. Immediate lockdown of the prison. Seal all sectors. But the order was futile. The escaping prisoners, emboldened by the chaos, were already overwhelming the security forces. The destabilizing energy field made containment nearly impossible. Mark carefully lifted Estelle into his arms, her weight surprisingly light. He joined the Emperor's boarding party, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "Lead the way, let's go to this lab." Lyra intercepted a communication, her violet eyes widened. "It's Xyla's. He intends to release the sentient energy source, to unleash chaos on the Eleni homeworld." A low, guttural hum vibrated through the prison, growing louder with each passing second. The containment field, already weakened, finally shattered. A visible wave of energy, shimmering and iridescent, erupted from Section Gamma 9, consuming the prison structure in its wake. As the energy surged outwards, Mark felt a strange pull, a magnetic force drawing the energy towards Estelle. The sentient energy source, once released, was seeking her out. He glanced down at her unconscious face, a terrifying realization dawning. Estelle's unique physiology. It was somehow connected to the sentient energy source. The energy source, now fully sentient, pulsed with malevolent glee, its tendrils of raw power lashing out, vaporizing the already crumbling walls of the prison block. Screams echoed through the corridors as escaped prisoners, caught in the energy's path, were either disintegrated or twisted into grotesque puppets, their eyes glowing with unnatural light. Mark, his arms tight around Estelle, stumbled through the debris-strewn corridor, the air thick with the smell of ozone and burning rockcrete. "This is insane," he gasped, his voice barely audible above the din. He paused, his geologist's instincts kicking in even amidst the chaos. "Wait," he said, pointing to a shimmering vein running through the fractured wall. "Look at that." Embedded within the rock was a cluster of crystals, their facets catching the chaotic energy and amplifying it, causing the very stone around them to vibrate. These crystals, they're resonating with the energy source, they're making it stronger. Emperor Thuron, his face grim, barked orders to his guards. "Secure a path. We must reach the experimental research lab. We need to understand what this thing is and how to contain it." As the guards formed a protective cordon, several escaped prisoners, their eyes wide and vacant, charged toward them, wielding shards of broken rockcrete as makeshift weapons. Mark, despite his fear, noticed something crucial. "Hold on," he yelled to the guards. "Aim for the joints, the rockcrete they're using. It's mostly feldspar. Hit it at a 45-degree angle and it'll shatter." The guards, initially hesitant, followed Mark's instructions. The feldspar weapons shattered easily, leaving the prisoners defenseless and quickly subdued. Lyra, her face pale but determined, consulted her data pad. "The crystal veins," she announced, her voice tight with urgency. "They form a network throughout the entire prison structure, and they all seem to converge at the experimental lab." As they navigated the twisting corridors, the energy source's presence grew stronger, a palpable hum that vibrated in Mark's bones. Suddenly, a wave of dizziness washed over him and he stumbled, his vision blurring. He could feel the energy source, a vast, chaotic presence, pulsing with a terrifying intelligence. He knew instinctively which direction it was coming from. The Emperor, noticing Mark's distress, stopped. His crystalline eyes narrowed, studying Mark intently. "What is happening to you, human? You seem affected. What do you know of this energy?" Mark, struggling to regain his equilibrium, could only shake his head. I don't know, I can just feel it. It's like a magnetic pull, but wrong." Before the Emperor could press further, they rounded a corner and encountered a group of Eleni scientists huddled together, their faces etched with fear. "Your Majesty," one of them stammered, "we were working in Sector Gamma when the containment failed. The primary researcher. He warned us about the dangers of weaponizing the energy source. He said it was too unstable." Mark's mind raced. The primary researcher. He might know how to control it. Just then, the damaged comm system flickered to life, displaying a distorted image of Xyla's, his face twisted into a cruel sneer. "Emperor," he hissed, his voice crackling with static. "So predictable. You think you can contain what you do not understand. Estelle is the key, and I will have her when the time is right." The image flickered and died, leaving only static, the Emperor's expression resolute. "Find the primary researcher," he ordered the scientists. "Determine his last known location." As they continued their advance, a shimmering wall of pure energy materialized in the corridor ahead, blocking their path. The energy source had formed itself into a massive, sentient construct, its surface roiling with chaotic power. "An alternate route," Lyra said, consulting her data pad. "The only other way to the lab is through the prison's lower levels." As they descended, Mark noticed something disturbing. The walls of the prison were not just built around the crystals. They were deliberately constructed to maximize their effect. The crystal veins were carefully positioned to channel and amplify the energy source. "This prison," he said, his voice low, "it wasn't just a containment facility. It was designed to harness the energy source." Lyra's fingers flew across her data pad. "The alternate route. It leads through Sector Omega. That section was used for high-security containment of extremely dangerous, mutated alien species." They reached a containment chamber. Inside, a grotesque alien creature, its skin a patchwork of chitin and pulsating flesh, stared back at them with mournful eyes. But instead of attacking, it reached a trembling appendage towards Estelle through the chamber's energy shield. It whimpered, a sound that resonated deep within Mark's chest. "It's not attacking," Mark said, his voice filled with disbelief. It's trying to reach her. It's like it senses a connection." Suddenly, the energy shield flickered and died, plunging the chamber into darkness for a split second. The creature, freed from its confinement, reached out and gently touched Estelle's face with its multi-jointed hand. The energy source that had been rampaging through the prison abruptly stilled. The chaotic hum that had filled the air vanished, replaced by an eerie silence. Mark stared at Estelle, his heart pounding in his chest. Her skin was beginning to glow, a soft, ethereal light that emanated from within. Estelle's bioluminescent glow intensified, bathing the prison corridor in an ethereal light. The mutated creature shuddered, its grotesque form rippling as if resisting an unseen force. Then its head tilted and a guttural rasp morphed into something resembling coherent thought conveyed directly into Estelle's mind. "Energy. Unstable. Key. Stabilize." Estelle gasped, her eyes widening. "It says. It was a guardian of the energy source. The mutation. It's from prolonged exposure. It believes I am the key to stabilizing it." She stumbled forward, drawn by an invisible pull. "The energy. It's calling to me." Mark, his geologist's instincts kicking in, understood. "It's concentrated at the core, isn't it? The source of the prison's power. We need to get you there." He placed a hand on her back, guiding her forward, deeper into the labyrinthine structure. They found him huddled in a hidden laboratory tucked away behind a false wall, Dr. Aris, the lead researcher. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair matted, his once pristine lab coat stained with grime and fear. He babbled incoherently, clutching a data pad to his chest. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he whimpered, his voice cracking. "Xylas, he forced me. He wanted to weaponize it. Said it was the only way to restore Eleni glory. I told him it was too unstable, but he wouldn't listen." Suddenly, the lab door hissed open, revealing Xylas flanked by a contingent of heavily armed guards. His crystalline eyes narrowed, fixated on Estelle. "The Emperor's little savior. How touching. But your little adventure ends here, Princess. The energy will be mine, and so will the Empire." Before Xylas could advance, Mark acted. Recalling the prison's geological surveys, he targeted a weak point in the ceiling above Xylas and his guards. Bracing himself, he smacked his head against a control panel, overriding the structural integrity field in that specific section. The ceiling groaned, then fractured. A cascade of rock and metal slammed down, separating Xylas from his forces, creating a temporary barrier of rubble and debris. "Emperor's guards with me," Mark shouted, pointing back the way they came. "Secure the perimeter, contain Xylas's forces." The Aleni guards, recognizing the urgency in his voice, obeyed without question, engaging Xylas's remaining troops in a fierce firefight. "You haven't seen the last of me," Xylas roared, scrambling over the rubble, but Mark and Estelle were already gone, racing towards the energy core. The core pulsed with raw, untamed power. Tendrils of energy arced and crackled, illuminating the chamber in an otherworldly glow. Estelle stood before it, her face pale, her body trembling. The energy surged around her, threatening to overwhelm her. I can't control it," she gasped, her voice strained. "It's too much. It's consuming me." Mark, sensing her distress, felt a strange tingling sensation in his own body. A warmth spread through his veins, a resonance with the energy that surrounded them. He reached out, taking Estelle's hand. "I'm here," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm with you, focus on me. We'll do this together." As their hands touched, a surge of energy flowed between them. Mark felt a connection to Estelle, to the energy itself, a sense of understanding that transcended words. He realized he wasn't just a geologist anymore. Something had awakened within him, a latent ability to sense and manipulate energy, a gift perhaps triggered by his proximity to the Aleni and their technology. Together, they focused their will, visualizing a new pathway for the energy, a sustainable flow that could power the Empire without causing destruction. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to redirect the energy, channeling it into a series of conduits that led away from the core. The chaotic energy began to calm, the violent arcs subsiding into a steady, controlled stream. The chamber hummed with newfound stability. As the energy stabilized, a wave of healing washed over the prison. The mutated creature, no longer writhing in agony, began to transform. Its grotesque form receded, replaced by a majestic, winged being of pure energy, a true guardian of the source. It hovered for a moment, its luminous eyes filled with gratitude, then vanished into the core, resuming its ancient vigil. Xylas was apprehended shortly after, his conspiracy laid bare. He confessed to manidoctorating Dr. Aris, to sabotaging the prison, all in a desperate attempt to weaponize the energy and reclaim territories lost in a previous war. A war against the human empire. His motivations, fueled by resentment and a twisted sense of patriotism, were a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition. Days later, Emperor Thuron addressed the Aleni people, his voice resonating with newfound hope. "Today, we stand at a crossroads," he declared. "A crossroads between destruction and creation, between fear and understanding. Thanks to the courage of Princess Estelle and the extraordinary actions of Mark Hall, we have averted disaster." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd. "Mark Hall, a human, has shown us that strength lies not in domination, but in collaboration. Therefore, I announce that the union between Mark Hall and Princess Estelle will usher in a new era of cooperation and understanding between humans and Aleni." Mark and Estelle stood side by side, facing the crowd. They exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them. Then Estelle stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "My father speaks of a union, and indeed, a union is what we shall have, but not in the way you expect. Mark and I have decided that we will not be officially married. Our commitment is to something greater, to work together as equals, to foster peace and understanding between our peoples." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mixture of surprise and approval. Mark stepped forward, echoing her sentiment. "We believe that true progress comes not from tradition alone, but from embracing new ideas, new perspectives. Together, we can build a better future for both our species." The final scene, a sprawling research facility, a testament to human-Aleni collaboration. Humans, with their ingenuity and problem-solving skills, worked alongside Aleni scientists. their compassion and deep understanding of energy complementing human innovation. They were developing new technologies, sustainable energy sources, and medical breakthroughs, all powered by the stabilized energy core. Humans were learning to interface with Alini technology, and the Alini were learning to adapt human designs to their unique physiology. Mark and Estelle stood overlooking the bustling lab, a sense of quiet satisfaction on their faces. Estelle turned to Mark, her eyes sparkling with affection and respect. "We did it," she said softly. "We changed our worlds." Mark smiled, taking her hand. "And together," he replied, his gaze meeting hers, "we can change the galaxy."